We now move to the next item of business, which is a statement by John Swinney on the draft budget 2014-15. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of his statement, and there should therefore be no interventions or interruptions. I call John Swinney, Cabinet Secretary. You've got 20 minutes.
Presiding Officer, I am pleased to set out today the Scottish Government's draft budget for 2014-15 and indicative spending plans for 2015-16. This is a budget focused on delivering investment, protecting household incomes and creating jobs. It is a budget that values our public services, the people that work for them and what they achieve. It is a budget that provides opportunities for our young people and security of care for our older people. And most of all, it is a budget that demonstrates the benefits of decisions being made here by those who care most about the future of the people of Scotland. Scotland is a wealthy and a productive nation. We have paid more in tax per head in each of the last 30 years than the rest of the United Kingdom. Excluding oil, our national income is on a par with the UK. Including oil, our GDP per head is 18% higher than for the UK. When compared with the OECD countries, our GDP per head would be the 8th highest. We have a highly skilled workforce, a long-standing reputation for innovation, a respected and recognisable brand, world-class universities and sectors and companies competing at the highest level across international markets. With the full decision-making powers of independence, I should today be able to present a budget that puts all of that economic strength to use in building a more prosperous and a more just Scotland. Instead, as a result of Westminster's decisions, I must today present a budget constrained by significant cuts. The UK spending round reduced the Scottish Government's fiscal dell by 10.9% in real terms over the period 2010-11 to 2015-16, and with further cuts expected for 2016-17 and 2017-18. Within that, our conventional capital budget will be reduced by 26.6%. Westminster's programme of welfare cuts is taking money out of the Scottish economy, adding to the burden on our public services and hitting household budgets. Despite this, the decisive and distinctive measures we have taken in Scotland are delivering results. Since my last budget, Scottish GDP statistics have shown growth in each quarter, with annual growth of 1.2% compared to just 0.3% for the UK as a whole. Employment has risen by 45,000 over the year, and our employment rate of 72.4% is higher than the UK's of 71.6%. Unemployment is down 19,000, and our unemployment rate at 7.4% is lower than the UK's of 7.7%. Youth unemployment is down 12,000 over the year, and our youth employment rate of 57.2% is higher than the UK equivalent at 49.8%. The Bank of Scotland PMI index for August indicated that private sector output has expanded for the 11th month and is rising at the fastest rate since the survey began. Scotland's recovery is not happening because of austerity, as the Chancellor claims. Recovery is taking place in spite of austerity. We cannot, Presiding Officer, however, take recovery for granted and must be focused on addressing real challenges in the economy. We will face these challenges from a position of strong financial management and responsibility. I have brought a balanced budget to Parliament each year since 2007, meeting our commitments and delivering value for money for the taxpayer. We continue to drive efficiency with the Scottish Futures Trust helping deliver savings in our capital programme, and public bodies expected to deliver annual efficiencies of 3%. In 2015-16, we will use our capital borrowing powers of up to £296 million to support our investment programme. We will apply the Land and Buildings Transaction Tax and the Landfill Tax, which I hope Parliament agrees this session. In 2014-15, I have made provision for the costs of the referendum on independence and the costs of implementing the Scotland Act 2012. Presiding Officer, I will now set out for Parliament the actions we are taking to deliver economic recovery, reform our public services and support Scotland's people, businesses and communities. Our spending plans are focused on accelerating economic recovery through investment. To tackle Westminster's cuts to capital spending, we are switching funding from resource to capital, utilising capital receipts and pursuing revenue-financed investment through the NPD programme and the regulatory asset-based rail enhancements. We do so while committing no more than 5% of our future total DEL budget on the cost of our revenue-funded investment programme. I have published today an update on these projects and expected investment through this year, through to 2022-23. In the short term, NPD investment is lower than originally forecast. This is for two reasons. Firstly, some NPD projects are being concluded at lower cost. Secondly, some projects are taking longer to be prepared and planned. The benefit of taking time to properly prepare projects is clear from the example of the Queensferry crossing, which will be delivered on time and within a cost estimate that since 2011 has reduced by £145 million. Work continues on time and on budget on the £842 million new South Glasgow Hospitals project and major refurbishment programmes across the health service. The Schools for the Future programme will deliver 67 new schools across Scotland, 11 of which are already complete and operational. Construction is underway in Glasgow and Inverness colleges. Almost £2 billion worth of projects are in procurement, and of these, over £500 million of projects are expected to begin construction this financial year in the Ayrshire College, the M8, M73, M74 project bundle, and a range of schools and community health projects. The effects of the recession are still being felt in the housing market, and the Government is determined to do all that we can to help. We will support the construction industry and private house building through a range of schemes, including the My New Home Mortgage Indemnity Scheme and through our £120 million Help to Buy Scotland scheme, providing access to affordable mortgages for home buyers. And we are on track to deliver 30,000 affordable homes by 2016, of which at least 20,000 will be for social rent. When the Parliament approved the budget bill in February this year, I set out plans to invest £859 million in affordable housing over the period 2012-13 to 2014-15. I intend to revise those provisions today. Over the 3 years to 2014-15, we now plan to invest not £859 million, but £970 million, and in 2015-16 we will invest a further £390 million. I can therefore confirm to Parliament that over the 4-year period to 2015-16, this Government will drive investment in affordable housing of more than £1.35 billion in total. Presiding Officer, together with the other elements of our programme, we will secure total investment of more than £8 billion in Scotland's infrastructure over the next 2 years. This budget takes action to boost employment, to create economic opportunities and enhance business confidence. Our plans are supported by the unique opportunities presented next year, when Scotland will welcome visitors from around the world to the Commonwealth Games, the Ryder Cup and the second year of homecoming. We will invest £24 million in 2015-16 to establish a national performance centre to help us sustain the legacy of the Commonwealth Games. These effects will benefit Scottish business. We are taking significant steps to support private sector growth and ensure that we offer the most business-friendly environment in the UK. All of our communities benefit from the Small Business Bonus Scheme and the most generous set of business rates relief in the UK, worth over £560 million each year. Our enterprise bodies will support business growth, including through the Scottish Investment Bank and the SME Growth Fund, and we will resource innovative measures to encourage a new age of entrepreneurship across Scotland. Digital technologies offer huge potential to improve productivity and to open up new markets. The budget confirms a range of investment in digital technologies, including more than £280 million in 2 major contracts with BT to ensure 95% of premises in Scotland have access to superfast broadband by the end of 2017-18, exceeding our earlier target. The transition to a low-carbon economy is a key theme of our economic strategy. We will provide £200 million over the next 2 years for schemes such as the National Renewables Infrastructure Fund, amongst others. And given the impact on investment of uncertainty over the UK energy policy, I will extend the Renewable Energy Investment Fund by a further year to 2015-16. In launching the second report on proposals and policies in June, the Minister for the Environment told Parliament that we would use the budget to boost investment in meeting our world-leading climate change targets. The budget confirms we will maintain the Sustainable Action Fund for the next 2 years, invest an additional £15 million in peatland restoration, deliver over £50 million investment in the Warm Homes Fund, a full year ahead of previous plans, enabling faster progress in delivering greater energy efficiency, and work with the private sector to secure around £200 million of measures to tackle fuel poverty. The budget also confirms that we will deliver around £40 million of investment in sustainable transport through the Future Transport Fund over the next 2 years. We will increase funding to support active travel. This will see an additional £20 million invested in cycling compared to the last budget, and in total, our support for active travel over the next 2 years compared to the last two will rise from around £40 million to around £60 million. A focus on education and training is fundamental to our efforts to support the economy and create the conditions for growth. We will extend funding for the 25,000 modern apprenticeships per year into 2015-16. We will continue to fund opportunities for all, guaranteeing support for all of Scotland's 16 to 19-year-olds not currently in education, employment or training. Free higher education will continue for Scottish students as part of annual investment of more than £1 billion in the sector. And this budget secures the position of our colleges for the remainder of this Parliament. In February, I confirmed to Parliament that we would provide resource funding of £522 million for colleges in 2013-14 and maintain that level in 2014-15. This budget delivers on that commitment. However, it also goes further. I confirmed today that the college's resource budget will increase to £526 million in 2015-16, supporting full-time courses and equipping Scotland's students for the world of work. We will also act to remove barriers to the labour market, particularly for women. We will invest over £190 million in the next 2 years to fund the Children and Young People Bill. This will provide an additional 125 hours of early learning and childcare for all 3- and 4-year-olds and looked-after 2-year-olds, worth around £700 to a family. Real practical help is being offered to hard-pressed families making their way in the world. Presiding Officer, our support for households is an integral part of our support for the economy. It is an approach that is in line with the values of the people of Scotland and demonstrates the priority that we attach to helping the most vulnerable. Despite the financial pressures that we face, I can give a clear and unequivocal commitment that NHS prescriptions, eye tests and personal care will remain free, the concessionary bus travel scheme will be maintained, the education maintenance allowance and from 2014-15 a minimum income for students will be available, and access to higher education will remain based firmly on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay. Our public services are vital to the people of Scotland. We value the NHS just as we believe that local government should be properly funded to deliver local services. This draft budget delivers in full the Barnett consequentials for the NHS revenue budget in both 2014-15 and 2015-16, securing continuing improvement in the quality of service the NHS provides. In England, the Chancellor's austerity drive has seen the local government settlement hit with a real terms cut of 18.6% since 2012-13. That reduction is passed on to Scotland through the Barnett formula. In contrast, local authorities in Scotland will see their resource funding from the Scottish Government maintained in 2014-15 and 2015-16, enabling them to maintain teacher numbers in line with pupil numbers and to deliver the council tax freeze, just as the Government promised that it would do. Along with protecting our vital public services, we are also intensifying our approach to public service reform. Alongside this draft budget, I am publishing an agreement on joint working, which places clear expectations on the public sector to work together to ensure that resourcing decisions are focused on the local priorities of each community planning partnership and that budgets are shared. We will fully fund in 2014-15 the 3 change funds announced in the spending review, supporting efforts to reshape care for older people, drive progress in early years and reduce reoffending. We will support the crucial role the third sector can play in each of these areas. Next year, we will invest £8.5 million in the 4th year of the Early Years Change Fund, and we will extend for a further year the Reducing Reoffending Change Fund that is helping to deliver the lowest reconviction rate in 14 years. We will build on the Reshaping Care for Older People Fund by allocating £100 million through NHS boards accessible to local authorities, the third sector and others to drive the shift towards prevention in 2015-16. £20 million will also be deployed to support national initiatives, meaning that we will invest £120 million in 2015-16 to assist the integration of adult health and social care services. Our Public Services and Reform programme depend on the hard work of public sector workers. Since 2010, they have been subject to pay restraint. I am publishing today a pay policy for 2014-15 and 2015-16, which sets out distinct differences with the approach taken by Westminster, particularly in relation to low-paid workers. We will implement the Scottish Living Wage and we will uprate it annually. We will increase the minimum uplift in basic pay for employees earning less than £21,000 from £250 to £300 each year. As a result, some staff will receive increases of up to 2%. And we flatly reject the Chancellor's threat to end pay progression. The Scottish Government will retain our existing policy, leaving public sector employers with the discretion to reach their own agreement with staff and trade unions and to do so outside the 1% cap that will apply to basic pay increases. The costs of Westminster's approach to public finances are increasingly borne by the most vulnerable in our society. From 2010 to 2015, their cuts to welfare benefits will take an estimated £4.5 billion out of the Scottish economy, widening the gap between rich and poor. The Scottish Government has neither the legal powers nor the financial resources to meet every cut or to mitigate all the damage done by Westminster. Last year, I announced that, working with our partners in local government, we would act to protect over 500,000 people in receipt of council tax benefit who would otherwise have struggled to pay their bills each month as a result of a Westminster decision to cut funding for successor arrangements to council tax benefit by 10%. In 2014-15, the Scottish Government will again contribute £23 million to mitigate the funding gap, and we propose to continue to work with our partners in local government to bring that support up to £40 million. This will ensure that we are able to maintain support for vulnerable groups through our council tax reduction scheme. In 2013-14, we set up the Scottish Welfare Fund and provided funding for 1 year. As people continue to struggle, I can confirm that we will maintain the fund at £33 million in both 2014-15 and 2015-16. We have already provided funding of £7.9 million for advice services to meet the additional demand Westminster's cuts have caused, with £2.5 million to help social landlords provide support to those affected by the bedroom tax. And we will provide a further £2.5 million to build the capacity of local communities and the voluntary sector to respond to the worst effects of welfare reform. This Government will use the resources we have, resources intended for devolved public services, to invest £68 million in each of the next 2 years to limit the damage of Westminster's welfare cuts. Today, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, who is investigating housing in the UK, has called for the bedroom tax to be abolished in light of its dire impacts. We agree, and with independence we will abolish the bedroom tax. In the interim, we will continue to press the UK Government to abolish this tax and to increase the support for those hardest hit. We do not have legal or financial powers over welfare benefits, but neither are we a government that will walk by on the other side. Last week, Shelter Scotland put forward a proposition that focused on the problems people are facing as a result of the bedroom tax. To wait until the start of next year's budget would be too late for many of those currently struggling to make ends meet. I intend to take immediate steps to deal with the iniquitous effect of the bedroom tax. I have considered Shelter's proposal, and I have looked at what capacity there is in this year's budget to meet that need. Using resources from savings in my own enterprise portfolio budget and underspend on home energy efficiency from within the fuel poverty budget caused by delays with UK energy schemes, I can confirm that the Scottish Government will invest up to £20 million this financial year to help those struggling the most with the costs of the bedroom tax. This funding will enable local authorities to add to their own provisions to increase discretionary housing payments to meet some of the implications of the bedroom tax. Presiding Officer, our action on the bedroom tax shows the values and priorities that matter in this Parliament. Where Westminster decisions have cut spending, this budget supports investment and job creation. Where Westminster decisions have reduced incomes, this budget delivers a social wage that supports our people. Where Westminster decisions are driving the privatisation of public services, this budget protects our NHS. And when Westminster targets the most vulnerable as part of its austerity drive, we will do all that we can to protect them. This budget makes clear the benefits of decisions being made here in Scotland by those who care most about our future. That is the opportunity on offer to the people of Scotland in 2014. I commend this budget to Parliament.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you. We now move to questions on issues raised in the statement and tend to allow around 40 minutes for questions and answers, after which we'll move on to the next item of business. It would be helpful if members who wish to ask a question of the Cabinet Secretary to press the request button now, and I call Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of his statement. Indeed, even earlier than that, the Cabinet Secretary sent his spin doctors out to brief that this would be a budget for independence. Honesty at last. Then we heard that an extra 10,000 Scots, an extra 32,000 young Scots have just joined the dole queues. And even the Cabinet Secretary realised that a budget for independence was the wrong priority, so he has dropped the slogan. But it is the same budget. It is a budget for independence. A don't rock the referendum boat budget for a Scotland at a standstill on pause. It is the wrong priority. Yesterday, a committee of this Parliament heard first-hand of the hardship faced by tenants who are victims of the bedroom tax. And I agree with the Cabinet Secretary on the iniquity of this tax. But I think those tenants, their priority might have been a budget to banish the bedroom tax from Scotland. Instead, Mr Swinney has found less than half the funds needed for the bedroom tax this year, in order to hide the fact that his budget itself has no provision at all to help next year. That means that councils will have to prioritise between the deserving and undeserving victims of the bedroom tax, and those are the wrong priorities. And next year, there is currently no promise of further help. So I simply say to Mr Swinney, this is, after all, a first draft of his budget. Will he take this budget for independence away and bring back a real budget for jobs and a budget which banishes the bedroom tax from Scotland this year, next year and the year after as well?
Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary.
I always find myself pointing out the fundamental incoherence of Ian Gray's arguments that he puts forward. But I don't understand how Scotland can be on pause when we have taken action today to do what we can within our powers to deal with and tackle the bedroom tax, and Ian Gray would serve his party better by unreservedly welcoming what the government has set out to do. And the reason why there is no provision in the 14-15 budget for dealing with the bedroom tax is I have absolutely no intention of letting the Westminster Government off the hook in 2014-15. It is the Westminster Government that has legislated for the bedroom tax, and whether the Labour Party is committed to getting rid of the bedroom tax, I watched 2 television programmes on Thursday night, and one Labour spokesman said yes, and the other Labour spokesman said no. So before the Labour Party comes here and tries to lecture me about the bedroom tax, I suggest they get some coherence into their argument and back us on the steps we are taking to tackle the iniquitous effect of the bedroom tax on the people of Scotland.
Gavin Brown, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I also thank the Cabinet Secretary for advanced sight of his statement. Today's budget should have been about the economy, particularly on a day when we find that 10,000 more people are unemployed in Scotland. But as far as the economy is concerned, this is a budget that has both under-promised and under-delivered. There was some encouraging news on the economy over the past couple of weeks. That, coupled with today's announcement, though, means it should have been a direct focus on the economy. So why, I have to ask the Cabinet Secretary, does he penalise business? Tucked away at the back of his budget on page 163, business rates go up from £2.4 billion this year to over £2.8 billion in 15-16. Almost £450 million extra coming out the pockets of business. Is this an idea? Is this an example of the benefits of decision-making being made here? How does he explain that on top of the retail levy and the empty property tax that he brought in? He talks about colleges, Presiding Officer. They used to get £560 million. This year they get 522. That's a pretty big drop. But because they're going up to 526 the year after, he says in his document, the funding floor has been increased. How on earth does going from 560 to 526 amount to an increase? And finally, how does he justify in these difficult economic times giving £115 million to Scottish Water in 2014-15 and £120 million in 2015-16? £235 million, Presiding Officer, that could be far better spent on capital projects across Scotland. This is a big disappointment, today's budget. If it was a film, Presiding Officer, it would have gone straight to DVD.
Kenneth Gibson, sorry, Cabinet Secretary.
It was meant to be funny. It didn't impress anybody. I know it. So, Mr Brown will have to keep practising, I think, on that one. Can I say that I find Mr Brown's narrative on the economy quite surprising, because I went through with considerable care in my statement some objective data over the last 12 months since I last delivered a budget to this Parliament on the performance of the Scottish economy. And just to reinforce the point, Scottish GDP growing at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom, employment at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom, unemployment lower than the rest of the United Kingdom, youth employment at a higher rate than the rest of the United Kingdom. And a Bank of Scotland Purchasing Managers Index, which was published on Monday, which I thought was a very encouraging indication of the attitudes of people within the business community about conditions within the business, within the Scottish economy. I would have therefore thought that with all that evidence, Mr Brown would have given due credence to the fact that the government's economic strategy was having the effect that we set out 12 months ago that it would actually do in the circumstances. Now, on the question of business rates, I would simply ask Mr Brown if he's forgotten about the concept of inflation. Business rates every September are uprated in line with inflation. And if he needs to have an explanation about the increased business rate take that's happening in Scotland, if he wants a comparator for that, he need only look at the rest of the United Kingdom, where business rates are rising in largely the same kind of fashion because of the inflation uplift as is happening here in Scotland. On colleges, well, Mr Brown frequently comes to Parliament and argues that we should reform the public sector. And when we reform the public sector, what does Mr Brown do? Mr Brown complains about it. And when we save money as a consequence of reforming the college sector, while still providing the same full-time equivalent and the deep courses that people require to get into the labour market, I don't know what he's complaining about. And finally, on the question of Scottish Water, I know Mr Brown sometimes he comes to Parliament and is driven by the ideological arguments of his side of the debate. And it's an ideological argument about privatising Scottish Water, and I don't accept it. I'm on the other side of the argument, because I look at the benefits that customers, the length and breadth of Scotland, have experienced by improvements in the quality of service and reductions in costs that are good for the charge payers here in Scotland. And I think the approach and strategy, not to mention the enormous capital investment that's happening, the length and breadth of the country, not least of which in the city of Glasgow that the Deputy First Minister represents, is a tribute to the capital investment programme of Scottish Water.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's statement and the £68 million the SNP Government will allocate in each of the next 2 years to mitigate the adverse impact of welfare reform. Clearly, this Government is working hard within its limited powers to protect the most vulnerable Scots from UK Government welfare
Can we have a question, Mr Gibson?
Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if any party has put to him specific proposals to increase funding in relation to welfare, and if so, has such a party indicated how such an increase will be funded, bearing in mind that such a proposal must be accompanied by a reduction within the same portfolio?
Cabinet Secretary.
As always, Mr Gibson, as convener of the Finance Committee, gets right to the heart of the matter on these questions by asking the hard questions of people as to where the money will come from to afford the propositions that they come forward. Now, Mr Gray is correct. This is a draft budget. It is here for discussion. We are perfectly happy to have that discussion, as I have with parties in every year in the parliamentary budget process. But I do think it is important that when people are wanting us to spend money on different and additional priorities, they should come here and tell us where the money is coming from to do so.
Willie Rennie, followed by Jenny Mara.
Can I thank the Finance Secretary for an early sight of the statement? He knows that we'll work with him in a constructive way to amend his budget. But remarkably, he makes no mention at all in his statement about the rise in unemployment today. Instead, he calls it a budget for independence. It's the wrong priorities, the wrong choices, and it's an inadequate response. I mean, look at the colleges. Since 2009, 80,000 part-time places have been cut, and his budget goes nowhere near repairing that damage. If you look at, there's fewer Scottish businesses have apprenticeships than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. The government, the UK government's £2,000 cut in national insurance should be promoted by the Scottish Government to recruit more apprentices. And I'm disappointed. I am disappointed repeatedly by his stubborn refusal to adopt our costed and their costed plans for 24,000 families with 2-year-old children. The Education Committee heard yesterday about the benefits that this could deliver for families. So on colleges and apprentices on 2-year-olds, will the Finance Secretary agree to look again at his plans?
Cabinet Secretary.
Again, I'm a bit surprised by Mr Rennie's observations about unemployment, because I think the explanation I would give on the unemployment situation today, if colleagues look at the detail of the statistics, is that there's a very substantial fall in economic inactivity in Scotland, which was people going back into the labour market, some of whom were successful in securing employment and entering the labour market, and a large number of whom have not been successful in achieving unemployment. But over the 12 months, unemployment is down 19,000, which I would have thought would have been welcomed. Indeed, the Secretary of State for Scotland, who the last time I looked was a colleague of Mr Rennie, was welcoming the unemployment position in Scotland today. So perhaps Mr Moore is slightly more authoritative on these questions than Mr Rennie. On the question of college places, of course, the point is what I said to Mr Brown. We've maintained the full-time equivalent numbers because the courses that we are supporting and providing in the college sector are designed to enable people to get back into employment. That's why we've had a rise in employment in Scotland. That's why we've had a fall in unemployment over the last 12 months. On modern apprenticeships, the government is, and I've just announced the extension of the funding into 2015-16 of the 25,000 modern apprenticeships. Now, of course, all of these things just become very familiar because the government keeps on delivering them. When we came to office, when Mr Rennie's colleagues left office, modern apprenticeships weren't at 25,000 in Scotland, they were at 16,000, and we've increased them very substantially and sustained that over a long number of years. On his point about promoting UK schemes, I'm very happy to. I work very collaboratively with the Secretary of State in the Scottish Employability Forum on promoting UK schemes. I'm unaware of any complaint the Secretary of State for Scotland has about how the Scottish Government goes about supporting joint working on employment. Indeed, after the Scottish Employability Forum last week, the Secretary of State for Scotland issued a tweet about how constructive the meeting had been between myself and himself at the Scottish Employability Forum. And I was delighted to see his little tweet on that question. It was more encouraging than Mr Rennie's statement to Parliament. And the final point is on the issue of childcare. The Government has just announced a significant expansion of £190 million of provision in childcare in Scotland. Is it not within Mr Rennie's good grace to welcome that investment in Parliament today?
Before I call Jenny Mara, can I say to members, I have got 16 members, all of whom wish to ask a question of the Finance Secretary. I want to get through all of them. So can I give some guidance to members? Cut out the preamble, one question, we'll get through it, because if you don't keep to that, you're going to be disadvantaging your own members. Jenny Mara, followed by Aileen MacLeod.
Presiding Officer, let me tell the Cabinet Secretary who...
We just got a question, Miss Mara. Can we get a question? A question, Miss Mara.
Who thinks that Scotland is on pause? The 32,000 extra young people who have become unemployed this summer. Presiding Officer, Cabinet Secretary, what is your budget doing to address that?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what the Government's budget is doing is it's providing 25,000 modern apprenticeships, which, of course, is, as I've just said to Mr Rennie, significantly higher than the numbers we inherited from the government that Ms Mara would have been a supporter of all those years ago in 2007 when they were defeated. Secondly, we have put in place the Opportunities for All guarantee, which assures every 16 to 19-year-old of a training or education opportunity if they are unable to find one or unable to find work. That's what the Government is doing to support young people with the steps and the measures in place to ensure that they can access the labour market and fulfil their potential.
Aileen MacLeod, followed by James Kelly.
Presiding Officer, we now know that a majority of Scots want to see the Scottish Parliament
Can we get a question, please?
of decisions over the economy and welfare. So can the Finance Secretary outline what he would have been able to do differently with the budget if he'd had those powers?
Cabinet Secretary.
But, the point that Aileen MacLeod makes is an important one about the flexibility and powers that we would have had if we had we were an independent country. For one, we would not have legislated to have the bedroom tax. We would never have brought that forward. For two, the Government would have taken a different approach on capital expenditure than the UK Government has taken to ensure that we didn't have the type of economic difficulties extended as we have had them extended by the failed economic policies of the current United Kingdom Government. And that's just two examples of what the Government would have done.
James Kelly, followed by Chick Brodie.
Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the cut in rail services detailed in page 128 of the budget documentation is as a result of the delay to the Egypt project as discovered in the recent Audit Scotland report on infrastructure projects?
Cabinet Secretary.
There is no change to the capital programme in relation to Egypt from what the Government has previously announced. The funding settlement that's in the budget provides fully and adequately for the government's ability to run the rail, was to financially support the running of the rail services in Scotland and to invest in the programmes that we have already committed to.
Chick Brodie, followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Will the Finance Secretary join me in welcoming the latest ONS figures today showing Scotland...
Can we get a question, Mr Brodie?
I'm coming to it. Higher employment and youth employment in the UK. Does he agree that this is further proof that the Scottish Government is doing the best it can with the economic powers it has, and that only a yes vote next September will give Scotland the chance to break away from the Chancellor's austerity programme?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think what I've tried to do in my statement was to give Parliament some dispassionate context based on factual information about what has happened since I last came to Parliament with a budget 12 months ago. 12 months ago, I came here and said that my priority was to improve economic conditions in Scotland. 12 years on, any dispassionate observer of the statistics that I have given to Parliament would say that the Government has made progress. It is not the end of the journey, it is what the Government is able to do. But of course, if we had the full range of economic and fiscal powers, Mr McNeill, we would be able to do a great deal more than what the Government is able to do in the constraints in which we operate today.
John Mason, followed by Neil Bibby.
This year, the budget was cut by the UK Government by £107 million immediately before it was implemented. Has there been any explanation about that and any guarantee it will not happen again next year?
Cabinet Secretary.
Mr Mason will be aware that during the financial year in 2013-14, we have had an in-year reduction in our budget. That has never happened in any year in which I have been the Finance Minister, and I don't actually, when I think about it, I can't imagine it has ever happened under devolution. And we also had a reduction of £125 million in our resource budget in 2014-15, applied by the UK Government. Now, I took a decision that I would not pass on any of the financial impact of that to local government in Scotland. So the local government settlement that I proposed in 13-14, which I set out as an indicative plan, for example, in 14-15, has been fulfilled by the statement that I have made to Parliament today. That's the way in which I think is appropriate for us to deal with these questions. As for guarantees about future reductions, I have no such guarantees. So if it's happened already, then I cannot rule out the fact that it might happen again. Although what is clear from the spending round announcement on the in late June is that there will be further reductions in public expenditure in 2016-2017 and 2017-18.
Neil Bibby, followed by Maureen Watt.
Mr Swinney has said he's increasing the budget for colleges in 2015-16. Can you confirm whether or not, Mr Swinney, this represents a real terms cut to college funding in 2015-16?
Cabinet Secretary.
If Mr Bibby will recall, I gave a guarantee to Parliament that there would be a funding arrangement of £522 million put in place for 13-14 and 14-15. I have fulfilled that as terms of my commitment, and I have increased that to £526 million in 2015-16. So I think Mr Bibby would be well served to welcome the increased resources the Government is putting into the college sector.
Maureen Watt, followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm that the Scottish Government will continue its commitment to 1,000 extra police officers on the street, helping to deliver record low levels of crime?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, that remains a commitment of the Government. The visible and strong police presence around the country has contributed significantly towards the reduction in crime levels in Scotland, and the commitment that the Government has given is fulfilled by the financial settlement we've put in place as part of the budget today.
Malcolm Chisholm, followed by Annabel Ewing.
Can the Cabinet Secretary explain why in the sections of his speech on economic recovery and support for business, he omitted to mention that the enterprise, energy and tourism budget will decline from £479 million this year to £444 million next year? And since our next debate is about enterprise bodies, can he tell us how the focus of those bodies will be affected for good or ill by the transfer of £41.8 million from resource to capital?
Cabinet Secretary.
On the question of the budget line that Mr Chisholm refers to, contains the expenditure on the enterprise networks and also on energy projects. And as I explained in my statement, I've extended the National Renewables Investment Fund for an extra 12 months because of the fact that it has been difficult to get renewable energy projects agreed because of the uncertainty over UK energy policy. So the factor that accounts for the decline in the budget in 2014-15 that Mr Chisholm highlights is essentially about arises out of a change to the energy line within that overall line. The enterprise networks are broadly consistent between 13-14 and 14-15, and there is an increase in energy expenditure in 15-16 representing the fact that projects are taking longer to be agreed because of the uncertainty over UK energy policy. In relation to the wider role of the enterprise networks, as I'm sure Mr Ewing will set out in the debate that follows, are focused on the support to the company sector to assist their development and to ensure that the government's objectives on internationalising business, on securing the opportunities in the low-carbon economy and on the work in the key sectors, which we saw some very good evidence about this week in relation to the success of the food and drink sector, are able to be fulfilled as a result of the positive involvement of the enterprise companies.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Mary Scanlon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The savings being delivered by the Queensferry Crossing project are, of course, very welcome indeed. And can the Finance Secretary expand upon the continued opportunities for local businesses as part of this vital infrastructure project for the Kingdom of Fife? And can he provide some detail on how this saving could be reallocated?
Cabinet Secretary.
In terms of the revised estimates that we published, this arises essentially out of the fact that the project is progressing well and the contract was structured around essentially a level of contingency risk that associated that ran alongside a fixed price contract. As the elements of risk are being addressed and dealt with, as I saw yesterday at the Queensferry Crossing, we are able to release those savings, and our latest estimate is that will total £145 million. We have, of course, allocated some of those resources already in 2 tranches, totalling £45 million. Other reallocations have been undertaken to support the infrastructure priorities of the government, which, of course, extend across a range of different areas, particularly the very substantive boost to the housing sector, which I'm sure is welcomed around the country.
Mary Scanlon, followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you. The college sector pension deficit was £115 million last year, an increase of 93% on the previous year and more than 10 times the deficit in 2007. What assurances can the Cabinet Secretary give to staff in the college sector who are rightly concerned about their pensions?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the issues in relation to the management of college pensions are entirely a matter for the governing bodies of individual colleges, and they must exercise the prudential judgment and management around the sustainability of the pension funds. That is their responsibility constitutionally to do so.
Claudia Beamish, followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. While there is some additional funding for peatlands and active travel, what reassurances can the Cabinet Secretary give that all the policies and proposals in the RPP2 relevant to this budget are fully costed so as to allow us to move forward incrementally, and that he has secured further funding for the carbon assessment tool so that a more effective carbon assessment of the budget can be undertaken to include second round emissions?
Cabinet Secretary.
I would say to Claudia Beamish that along with and I didn't make reference to this in the budget statement, but the carbon assessment of the 2014-15 budget is published. Obviously, I think this would be, Mr Harvey and I have discussed this on many occasions over the last few years. This is an innovative area of policy making and assessment, so the government is very open to suggestions from across the chamber as to how we can strengthen the carbon assessment of the budget. I think what we have is an approach which is getting stronger and more effective over time, but as I say, I'm very happy to engage in discussion about how we can strengthen that. In relation to financial commitments and policy commitments, the commitments I've set out in the budget are the funded commitments of the Scottish Government. They emerge out of the report on policies and proposals, and of course the Environment Minister, Paul Wheelhouse, told Parliament that the Government would come back and boost the financial support that was here for RPP measures, and that's exactly what we've done this afternoon.
Patrick Harvey, followed by Kevin Stewart.
If the government intends to raise active travel up its agenda, which would be welcome after the very many tragedies that we've seen, what are we to make of a statement which commits 60 million on active travel over the next 2 years, but a budget line on sustainable and active travel which commits only 44, as well as other opaque budget lines such as the Future Transport Fund? Isn't it time for a single, clear, transparent budget line on active travel so that everybody looking at these documents knows what the government intends to spend public money on?
Cabinet Secretary.
I have some sympathy with the position that Mr Harvey articulates, because there are, I accept that in the budget documents there can be elements of expenditure that appear in different policy areas. And what I have to try to manage is a balance between ensuring that Parliament can see the structure of the budget on a comparative basis year by year in a fashion that Parliament generally believes to be acceptable, and the portfolio approach is essentially, by agreement with the Finance Committee, the way in which the budget should be set out. I'm quite happy on other occasions, and in the light of the point that Mr Harvey has raised with me, I'm quite happy to marshal some of the information in a clearer fashion which identifies the support that's in place on cycling, and to provide that to him and to place that in SPICE. I'll do that in the light of the question that he's raised this afternoon, because there are different elements of budgets that come in from different portfolios that contribute towards what I think is an approach on cycling which is stronger and better and more effective than was the case in the previous provisions that I brought to Parliament. So I have acknowledged and accepted that we needed to do more to encourage cycling activity. We've done that in the budget, and I'll happily share that evidence and analysis with Mr Harvey and with Parliament.
Kevin Stewart, followed by Anne McTaggart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Cabinet Secretary pointed out that Westminster are imposing a cut of over 18% to local governments south of the border. I welcome this Scottish Government recognising the need to protect local services. Can the Finance Secretary expand on how local government spending is being protected in this budget, including through additional funding for early years?
Cabinet Secretary.
The government's set out the funding priority that we attach to early years education. We think that the measures that we have in place to extend the number of hours that 3- and 4-year-olds and looked after 2-year-olds are able to access early years education and support is an important part of ensuring that provision is in place. We will also be looking at working with our local authority partners in the implementation of the Children and Young People Bill to find the best and the most effective way to ensure that that investment can be deployed to create the outcome that I was suggesting, or the two outcomes I was suggesting, of improved early learning opportunities for young people, but also to encourage greater participation in the labour market by more and more women.
Anne McTaggart, followed by Ken McIntosh.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, this is another significant real terms reduction in resource grant for local government. Will this not inevitably result in more job losses on top of the 37,000 jobs already lost under this government?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I can appreciate the issues that Anne McTaggart raises. I simply would point out to her that local government in Scotland has been very fairly treated by the Scottish Government compared to local government south of the border. Up until 2012-13, the government had received an increase in its budget of about 6.4%, and local government got an increase of 8.9%. And that indicates that local government did better out of the budget than the Scottish Government did. Now, of course, Anne McTaggart is free to argue that local government should get more money. So I'll look forward to the Labour Party coming forward with the proposal in the budget which says how much more money local government is going to get. But I gently point out that every year the Labour Party has come to Parliament and complained about the level of funding for local government, they have never, in private to me or as part of the budget negotiations, ever advanced an argument for giving local government more money. I look forward to that being changed this year, but I just point out that in all the years I've been Finance Minister, I have never been asked to give more money to local government by the Labour Party as part of the budget negotiations.
Ken McIntosh, followed by Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary whether he will provide Parliament with further information on what is included in the 5% cap on his revenue-funded investment programme? For example, would the local authority contribution to an NPD schools project be included in that 5% cap?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think there's a comprehensive amount of information that's available in the budget document. I've put two new annexes into the budget document that give a whole host of information. They're in there at page 168 is Annex A and Annex B is page 171. There's a substantive amount of information that sets out what is in the government's 5% framework, and I certainly would be very happy to discuss those issues with Parliament, but the information is in the budget document.
Margaret MacDonald, then finally Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was glad to hear the Cabinet Secretary give such a wholehearted endorsement of the public ownership of water. I wonder, could we have a step for a hint in the rest of the next draft of the budget as to how he feels about the ownership of the new natural, please excuse me, the renewables industries which are now being developed? Are they going to be in public ownership also?
Cabinet Secretary.
One of the aspects of the legislative changes that we're bringing forward in relation to the water industry is to enable Scottish Water to be a more active player in the development of renewable energy measures, and as a consequence of its ownership by the government, then clearly these investments will be part of the public assets of the Scottish Government. So in that respect, then I can give Margaret MacDonald some comfort in her answer. Clearly, there's a lot of other investment that's made in the renewable energy sector that's undertaken by private companies. The Government has no proposals to change that arrangement. But clearly, having a strong and positive policy framework that supports the development of the renewable energy industry in Scotland is, I think, a strong advantage for the Government in Scotland.
Jim Eadie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that an additional £20 million for cycling is one that will be widely welcomed by cycling organisations throughout Scotland as a very welcome investment? This is not an accident, but has come about as a result of a government that is willing to listen and act upon the concerns expressed by cyclists in Scotland.
Cabinet Secretary.
I appreciate Mr Eadie's comments. Mr Eadie has been vociferous, along with Alison Johnson, in coming to see me about issues around cycling and cycling investment, and I'm glad that we've been able to make some progress on this question in the budget settlement. I think there are opportunities for us to ensure that this money is used effectively to strengthen cycling infrastructure in Scotland, and I give Parliament the assurance that ministers will be keen to do so as part of the discussions around the budget and the implementation of the commitments we've made.
Thank you. That ends the statement from the Cabinet Secretary. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 7643 in the name of Fergus Ewing on enterprise networks. I'll give a few moments for the front benches to change seats, and for members who leave the chamber, can I ask you to do so quickly and quietly? Members who wish to speak in the debate should press the request to speak button now. I call Fergus Ewing to speak to move the motion. Minister, you've got 13 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. May I first warmly welcome the Cabinet Secretary's announcement on the budget statement. As he outlined, this government continues to make sound financial investments in Scotland's future, despite the ongoing unprecedented tight budget settlements handed to us by the Westminster Parliament. We can now see positive signs of global economic recovery gaining traction, for example, growth in emerging markets. We also see recent positive developments in the Scottish economy, for example, a 2% fall in youth unemployment over the year and positive business surveys such as the Ernst & Young 2013 UK Attractiveness Survey. Now, this showed, Presiding Officer, that in 2 of the last 3 years, Scotland has been the top-ranked country or region outside London in securing foreign direct investment projects. That's FDI. And Scotland's FDI projects in 2012 were up by nearly a half to 76 projects compared to 2011. That's the highest number in 15 years. The number of SDI projects secured by most English regions, excluding London, declined in 2012. Investments in England outside of London were 24% below their level in 2010, a decline that has coincided with the closure of the regional development agencies and the switch to local enterprise partnerships. In contrast, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland recorded large rises. Now, our performance and economic recovery can be clearly linked to the actions that we have taken. We are investing decisively in Scotland's economic growth. We are working through our enterprise and skills agencies. We are working closely with our partners in local government to support businesses grow and internationalise, export, whilst helping our people to take advantage of the opportunities that will follow. For example, a Russia business which began life in a garden shed has signed a deal with China's largest online training provider. The directors and founders of Dingwall-based TEFL Scotland, Joe and Jennifer Hallwood, who now employ 13 staff, will be working with JR Bo Hong UN Company Limited, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Presiding Officer, to develop and promote distance and classroom training and international culture exchanges to English teachers across China. Now, the role of our enterprise agencies is a key element of the distinctive approach that we take in Scotland. Their work supporting Scottish businesses is aimed to increase exports, to increase productivity and to ensure that Scotland continues to have sustainable economic growth. In comparison with recent developments south of the border, where the coalition government has abolished the regional development agencies, show that I think ours is the right approach. And further, we understand that the return on investment for every £1 spent by the enterprise network, approximately £6 is returned. And over the next decade, Presiding Officer, Scottish Enterprise anticipates around a £5.75 billion net additional return on GVA from its proposals. Now, I mention all these statistics, and these statistics are, in some cases, estimates. They may be right, they may be wrong. But I think it is clear that overall the performance thus far has been very strong, and we are reasonably entitled to assume that in future they remain on the right track, and equally their performance will be good in future indeed. Tavish Scott, certainly.
Tavish Scott.
To the Minister for giving way when he's on the subject of statistics. One of the statistics his government are using at the moment is that 75% of the people of the Highlands and Islands will benefit from the investment in broadband upgrades that is taking place, or is to take place, next year and the year after. Would you accept that actually it's the 25% of households and businesses that don't have access to broadband or on dial-up speeds that actually is the more important investment? And would he bring his office to bear on that subject rather than just making sure that those who've already got get better?
Thank you, Minister.
Well, I think Tavish Scott has raised a very significant point, and one indeed that takes up a lot of time and consideration. I recently met with the HIE team involved in the broadband exercise and with representatives of BT. This is a matter that's very close to the heart, I think, of all the HIE officials. You know, they're all citizens too. And equally, as Tavish Scott well knows, businesses, particularly in tourism, if they're not on broadband, it's very difficult to run a successful business. 10 years ago, it may have been a luxury, an add-on. Now, it's a sine qua non of success, if I may use a Latin phrase. So we will certainly be pursuing these matters. I think our success has been recognised in not altogether likely places. Let me turn to the Financial Times. Its editorial said, "The Team Scotland approach adopted by the devolved Holyrood government and its enterprise agencies has helped to attract high-profile investments over the past year in spite of the tough economic environment. While parts of England are still struggling to adjust to the abolition of RDAs, Scotland has benefited from stability and continuity offered by Scottish enterprise." Indeed, in October 12, following a regional analysis report into UK public expenditure, one of the authors of said report said, "An investor looking at the North East," that's the North East of England, "has to traipse round the whole of the North East, knocking on a variety of doors. They go up to Scotland, they go and see Scottish enterprise, it sorts out grants for the land, it sorts out grants for training, it sorts out all of the support that they require, and that obviously makes it a whole lot easier for them." And Scottish business supports our approach too. Ian Pittman, chairman of Aromatics, said, "We have enjoyed fantastic support from HIE and SC and SDI, Scottish Development International, over the past years, and we hope these positive working relationships will continue to support further international growth and help take Aeronautics from a 5.2 million business to a truly global brand." Now, the role of account management is very important, and I wanted to showcase this in a sense in this debate, Presiding Officer, with the support of colleagues, I hope, across the political spectrum. SE and Scottish Enterprise work with around 10,000 Scottish businesses, providing support to help them grow through innovation, access to finance, exporting, leadership and other key business support areas. Over 2,000 of these companies are account managed, ensuring a focused and targeted approach on those that can deliver the greatest growth. It makes sense to focus attention and indeed taxpayers' cash on those companies which are identified as having the capacity for the greatest growth. Plainly, we cannot support every company with grants, and therefore that has been the prioritisation method. I hope that methodology is one that today we can together endorse once again. Now, over the period 2008-9 to 2011-12, it's estimated that 1,120 companies took part in the evaluation and that they achieved a net additional increase in turnover of £1.45 billion, contributing net additional gross value added of £575 million to the Scottish economy. Multiplier effects through supply chains and spending by employees are estimated to have contributed an additional 535 GVA. Total net addition of GVA over the period of 08-9 to 11-12 is therefore estimated to be £1.1 billion, £1,100 million. £1,100 million of turnover to companies generated as a result of account management activity. Pretty significant. Certainly.
Martin Fraser.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. We had some very interesting evidence this morning in the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. I'm not referring to the Minister's evidence, which was interesting in itself, but evidence that came later from those involved in the entrepreneurial arena about this question of account-managed companies. And they were full of praise for Scottish enterprise and account-managed companies. But they did say there was an issue with a selection of companies to go into that programme. Would the Minister care to say something about that, how that might be improved? Because it's very easy to say we should select the companies with the greatest growth potential, but who does the selecting? How do you always make sure you're getting the right people into the pipeline?
Minister.
Absolutely perfectly valid point, and it's something I'm very keen, or at least I'm very willing to look at again. I mean, plainly, any gatekeeper process has to be fixed and certain. Otherwise, if it's too vague, it's really not much use. Fixing an amount of turnover seems to me to, on the one sense, be open to criticism for being arbitrary, and yes, it is. But on the other hand, it has an element of certainty and clarity, so that you don't have endless arguments about who's entitled to be in and who's not entitled to be in. That said, it's not the only yardstick, and some companies, even with no record of profits and growth and turnover, are, for example, in the life sciences area, are accepted for account management, where plainly they have a potentially world-beating product. So there is an element of flexibility. It's perhaps not the time now to go into all the details of this, but I'm happy to work with MSPs and all parties to look at this. I think my feeling is we've got it right. but if there has been criticism from business this morning, my officials will look at that, and I'm happy to come back to MSPs if they have any particular specific suggestions to make. Presiding Officer, over the period of the evaluation, 6,800 net additional direct jobs were created, with 8,330 created through multiplier effects. The total net extra jobs were 15,130. I think that merits this debate this afternoon. Over 15,000 people who have a job, at least in part, because of the account management services of the SE. And this suggests a GVA return of around £5 to every £1 of SE spend over the 4-year period. And account-managed companies currently employ 300,000 people. In the first quarter of 2013, 43% reported they'd recruited more people, including young people. And looking at the employers' views of account management reported in the evaluation, here were the findings. 90% were satisfied or very satisfied with the support they got. 80% did not think they could find that support elsewhere. 80% said that support had increased their level of turnover. 40% said SE support had helped them increase international sales. 50% said support had helped them enter new international markets. 75% stated their innovation spend had increased as a result of SE support. 70% reported productivity had improved. These are good results.
Minister, you're approaching your last minute.
Well, listen, I'm sorry, I've got oodles of this left. It's a non-ministerial technical expression, that.
I'm afraid we are rather tight for time, so you're now in your last minute.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Looking northward, over the past 5 years, Highlands and Islands Enterprise has built a portfolio of accounts comprising 596 businesses and social enterprises and 50 communities as well. They have achieved great success too, as has Visit Scotland, to which perhaps I will return in my closing speech. And therefore, to conclude, let me just pay tribute to every single person that works in our enterprise agencies in Scotland. I've met a great many of them. I've visited companies and visited all parts of the country just about with them. They do a great job for Scotland. Today is the opportunity of us to thank them, to pay tribute to them, and perhaps see how, through positive suggestions, we can do even better in future.
Many thanks, Minister. I now call on Jenny Mara to speak to and move Amendment 7643.1. Maximum 9 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to begin, like the Minister, by putting on record our support, the Labour Party's support of the work of Scottish Enterprise and indeed all of our enterprise networks for the work they do in developing Scotland's businesses and economy. I had the pleasure just a couple of weeks ago of meeting Lorne Crerar of the Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and I was impressed to hear about HIE's ongoing work and their ambitions for the future. This evaluation we are debating today highlights much of the good work that Scottish Enterprise, together with our other enterprise agencies, undertake and the rewards that they bring to our economy. Particularly, the creation of new jobs and increase in turnover for Scottish companies will be warmly welcomed across this chamber. However, I think it's important to sound a note today that we cannot be complacent, especially in this economic environment. I'm sure the Minister would agree with me. The Government's motion rightly points out that Scotland has not been immune to the global recession. And with long-term youth unemployment remaining stubbornly high, unemployment among women rising, and part-time, temporary or zero-hours jobs becoming an increasingly common feature of our economy, we believe on these benches that perhaps now is the right time for the Government to review how our enterprise agencies are interacting with each other, with local and national government, to properly assess how they are delivering against our shared aim to build an economy that is equitable, sustainable, and consists of a skilled workforce doing high-quality jobs with good contracts. Yes.
Maureen Watt.
I thank the member for giving way. But is that not what she's just suggested was very much a feature of the Scottish Executive between Liberals and Labour, and in fact Scottish Enterprise had no clear direction, and since this government came to power it has had completely clear direction of where it should go, and that is why it's been successful.
Jenny Mara.
Well, Presiding Officer, I was hoping to strike a conciliatory note. The Scottish...
Order, please. We can't hear the member.
I'm going on to propose a review of the agencies. Across since 1999, Scottish Enterprise has operated and effectively, but perhaps not always as effectively as we would like. And I said we can't be complacent. We must make sure that the money we are spending on our enterprise agencies is working to its full potential, increasing our economy and getting the best jobs for people as well. And that is the proposal I'm making today. Because in 2007, when the SNP came to power, they announced reforms to the way that our enterprise agencies operate. Now, this resulted in a number of changes to Scottish Enterprise's governance and remit, including the transfer of Scottish Enterprise's skills activity and Career Scotland to Skills Development Scotland, and responsibility for Business Gateway to local authorities. But since 2007, we have had very little analysis of how effective these changes have been, particularly in the light of our challenging economy.
Excuse me, Ms Mara, could I ask the conversations that are taking place in the Chamber, particularly those behind the member who's speaking, to cease? Jenny Mara.
Presiding Officer, we need to look at the impact that this has had on workers and business. We believe that now is the right time to take a pulse check. Because as well as noting the increased turnover and jobs growth for businesses being account managed by Scottish Enterprise, the evaluation published on Monday also noted that over 300 companies have been stuck in transition between Business Gateway and Scottish Enterprise's account managed process, having been unable to access the intensive support to grow. The report on Monday concluded the pipeline is not working as effectively as it could be, but it could not say whether the problem lay with the kind of companies being put forward or the kind of support that they were being offered. Now, a government review of the reforms it made in 2007 could help bring clarity to identified areas for improvement like this, making it easier for the right businesses to get the right support. Our enterprise agencies provide a powerful combination of support for business and support for workers. The creation of Skills Development Scotland, although removing the skills function from Scottish Enterprise, was designed to bring an even greater focus on providing workers with the kind of knowledge and ability required by our industries. In particular, the Modern Apprenticeship Scheme was designed for the government to deliver on its youth employment strategy and opportunities for all commitment. But we know from a report published last week by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission that those opportunities could be more equitable. The Equalities and Human Rights Commission report concluded that less than 0.5% of modern apprenticeship schemes are being taken up by disabled people in Scotland. That's despite 8% of 16 to 24-year-olds having a disability. It concluded that less than 2% of modern apprenticeships are taken up by ethnic minorities, despite 4% of 16 to 24-year-olds in Scotland being from an ethnic minority background. And it concluded that there is no evidence of women entering traditionally male apprenticeships, despite the many more males taking up traditionally female apprenticeships. This kind of analysis is important because it demonstrates whose skills we are developing and what kind of labour force we are building. The Modern Apprenticeship Scheme is just one example of our enterprise agencies, our local authorities and businesses working in partnership to deliver on key government pledges. A review of how that partnership working takes place, where lessons can be learned from good practice, we believe could lead to a workforce where opportunities are available for every person. This recommendation was reinforced in a 2011 Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee report into the purpose of our enterprise networks. That report stated, "It is of critical importance at this early stage of economic recovery and for the future, that industry is able to articulate its needs and receive a joined-up skills response based on local, regional and national mapping of need. Presiding Officer, can I just check if I have 7 or 9 minutes?
You have 9 minutes.
Thank
I can
you.
give you a few seconds extra for the interruption.
Thank you. Now, that report from the Economy Committee looked at our enterprise networks as a whole, where gaps in partnership working exist, and what proactive steps government can take with local authorities and enterprise agencies themselves to improve their working. It concluded by stating, the Scottish Government now needs to give serious thought to what shape enterprise and regeneration support in the future might take. Our future challenges for growth and regeneration are clear. We have a workforce that is increasingly reliant on part-time, 0 hours or temporary work. We have unaddressed long-term youth employment, and women are still facing the brunt of the recession. Enterprise networks have a significant role to play in overcoming these challenges, and the report published on Monday shows that they can be successful. But we need to ensure that government, local authority and businesses are working together as efficiently and as effectively as they can be to make sure we're spending this public money as effectively as it can be and to get the right support to those who need it. There is no room for complacency. I'm sure the Minister would agree. I believe that a government-commissioned review of our enterprise networks could present significant opportunities to promote a sustainable, equitable economy equipped for further growth. Presiding Officer, I would like to move the amendment in my name.
Many thanks. I now call on Murdo Fraser to speak to and move amendment number 7643.2. Maximum 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. It's in 2007 that I last held the Economy and Enterprise brief for my party. It's almost as if nothing has changed in the interim, because here we are back debating Scottish enterprise once again. And I can well remember all those debates years ago, Deputy Presiding Officer, when Scottish enterprise was regularly a kicking boy in such debates. I have to confess I did my own fair share of kicking in those days. I was not alone in that. Front bench spokesmen from the Minister's own party, then in opposition, were themselves more than happy to put the boot in on regular occasions. But times have changed. Times have changed, and the enterprise networks have, of course, changed with them. And what we now see are much slimmed-down organisations with smaller budgets, fewer responsibilities and a much more focused approach. Today's debate has been held in a week when a new study has come out in relation to Scottish Enterprise's account management approach. Now, this has been largely positive, although a number of concerns have been highlighted around the low level of churn in the account management portfolio, a slow transition from business gateway growth pipeline to account management, and shortages of management and performance data for account-managed companies. At the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee this morning, we also heard evidence from We Do Scotland to the effect that there was a lack of information about who can apply to be part of the high growth programme from Scottish Enterprise, and the need for account managers with relevant experience and expertise to be aligned with the high growth companies being accepted on the programme. Those who have account managers assigned from relevant backgrounds have had very positive experiences, but this has not always been the case. And we also heard evidence about the disconnect between business gateway and transition to account managed programmes, which Jenny Mara picked up on, and also the more general lack of knowledge of help available to SMEs. So there are improvements to be made, but these should not detract from what is overall a positive story. There remains, as I debated with the Minister a few moments ago, a deeper philosophical issue around this question of picking winners, and I'm sure that debate will continue. Now, Jenny Mara, in her amendment, makes the case for a full review of the work of the enterprise agencies. And I listened with great interest to the case Jenny Mara made. I have to say I am not convinced at this stage that is the right thing to do. It's not that long ago we had a major restructuring and upheaval in the enterprise networks. That's had time to bed down. I think overall that's been a positive change. I think we should keep a close watching brief on that, but I'm not sure a full review, digging it up to examine the roots at this stage is necessarily the right way to go. I'd like to address my own amendment, Presiding Officer, which raises a specific issue in connection with Scottish Enterprise, that of the intermediary technology institutes. Now, members with long memories will recall that the ITIs were set up in 2002 by the then Scottish Enterprise Chief Executive Robert Crawford, with the aim, a laudable aim, of helping commercialise research out of Scottish universities. There were 3 ITIs established, one in life sciences, one in energy and one in digital media, with offices in Dundee, Aberdeen and Glasgow, respectively. The then First Minister Jack McConnell was fulsome in his support of this new initiative, saying, "Scottish technology institutes will have a crucial role in making the giant leap to more world-beating companies and high-quality jobs." And it was not just members of the then Scottish Executive who were supportive. Alec Neil, MSP, then convener of the Parliamentary Enterprise Committee, said they play a vital role in creating the industries of tomorrow. Sadly, the ITIs had a checkered history. In the first 2 years, there was a high level of turnover in senior managers, amid complaints that Scottish Enterprise was cutting back on its initial funding promises. There was a major restructuring in 2007, and then in 2009, their operation was brought back in-house. In 2010, the decision was taken by Scottish Enterprise to stop investing in new projects altogether. The total spend over this period was some £231 million. The value of intellectual property generated to date is assessed at a mere £600,000. On any measure, this was a spectacular failure. This week, I asked the Auditor General, Caroline Gardner, to carry out an audit of the performance of the ITIs. Where we have such large sums of money, public money involved, it is important that we understand exactly what went wrong, not least so that we can learn lessons for the future. Yes, I'll happily give way.
Minister.
I'm aware of Mr Fraser's concerns about these issues as of yesterday when the amendment was lodged. But I want to say to Mr Fraser that I'm more than happy to facilitate a meeting with Paul Lewis at Scottish Enterprise, at which he would have the opportunity to discuss these concerns and the detail of them at some length. And of course, the Auditor General is independent of the Scottish Government and will make her own decision as to how to pursue this matter.
Martin Fraser, you're now in your final 30 seconds.
Thank you. I'm grateful to the Minister for that intervention and that offer. It's very helpful. I look forward to engaging with Scottish Enterprise directly. I should say I did raise this question directly with Lena Wilson, Scottish Enterprise's Chief Executive, in May when she came to the committee. She subsequently provided me with a study that had been carried out by the consultancy Frontline, which is interesting reading, but does not specifically address the question of the performance of the ITIs. So I do think there are further studies required. I applaud ambitious programmes. I accept that on occasion there will be risks when public money is spent, and which do not always pay off. I'm not looking to damn anyone for mistakes that may have been made, but I think we need a proper understanding of what went wrong, not least so we can learn the lessons for the future, and the Scottish Government and its agencies do not repeat the mistakes of the past. And thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I have pleasure in moving the amendment in my name.
Many thanks. We now turn to the open debate. Speeches of a maximum of 6 minutes. We are very tight for time. I call Mike Mackenzie, to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And on the day or the afternoon when the draft Scottish Budget is published, it's entirely appropriate to debate this motion. And in considering the motion, it's helpful, I think, to place it in context. And that context is one in which we are now, at long last, tentatively emerging from what some commentators have described as the deepest recession in over a century. And the performance of our enterprise agencies must be considered against this background. And it's against this background that the results they've achieved can only be described as staggeringly successful. A payback which is achieving over £5 of benefit for every public pound spent is in any climate a worthy achievement. In the economic climate of recent years, it's remarkable. Presiding Officer, the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee has had the opportunity of questioning senior officials from the enterprise agencies on several occasions over the last 2 years. And I know from these sessions that the evidence of their effectiveness, the effectiveness of our enterprise agencies, can stand up to scrutiny. And I would in particular pay a tribute to the robust methodology developed by Scottish enterprise to analyse their own effectiveness. It takes a courageous and confident organisation to subject itself to such robust self-analysis, and I'm convinced that this is part of the key to its success in recent years. Another part of the reason for the success of our enterprise agencies are the clear goals and the direction set by the Scottish Government. This is about economic understanding and competence. The great economist David Ricardo, I think, made the case very well in his theory of comparative advantage, which can perhaps be summarised as do what you're good at and leave others to do what they are good at. And in helping businesses with high growth potential and in facilitating sectors in which we excel, we are following this wisdom. And for many months now, this is being seen to have paid off, as a range of statistics steadily show that we're generally outperforming the UK economy as a whole. Employment is higher, unemployment lower, growth is returning faster than it is to the UK as a whole, and over the long term, Scotland is performing extremely well indeed. And just as the Scottish Government is following a course of economic wisdom, sadly, George Osborne is ignoring the wisdom of England's perhaps greatest economist, John Maynard Keynes, and we're all paying for the Chancellor's economic ineptitude. Think how much more we could achieve in Scotland if Mr Osborne had not cut our capital budget by 26%. Think how much better our oil industry could be performing if he had not conceived or mounted his ill-conceived tax grab. And think how much better our renewable industry...
Mr Mackenzie, we have a point of order.
Well, I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. On the point of order, I understood that the topic for this debate was Scotland's enterprise network. We have a motion and amendments in front of us. Is it in order for members to address a subject completely out with the terms of the debate?
Well, the members, of course, should try to stick to the terms of the debate, and if any member wishes to intervene on another member, they can ask to do so. Mr Mackenzie, please continue.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And think how much better our renewable industry could be performing if he wasn't dithering over energy market reform, causing huge uncertainty and an investment hiatus. And think too how much better we could do if we could reduce VAT on tourism. Think how much better we could do if we could reduce air passenger duty, more enterprise. Think how much better we could do if we could work with oil and gas industry to provide a stable and consistent tax regime, more enterprise, more success for our enterprise companies. And think what we could do with the prudent use of borrowing powers, following Keynes's counter-cyclical wisdom, boosting the economy in times of recession and leaving a lasting legacy of better infrastructure. More enterprise, and think how much better our enterprise companies could therefore do. Think how much more they could achieve. Certainly.
Margaret McDougall.
Member for taking an intervention. Given that the economy is in a much different place now than from what it was in 2007, do you not agree that this is the time that we should be looking at a review of these enterprise agencies?
Mike Mackenzie.
I think I entirely disagree. I think they're doing staggeringly well, and any review should be conducted, if it's conducted at all, on the basis of understanding just how on earth they're managing to produce these incredible results against such a difficult background. So, Presiding Officer...
The member's concluding.
The Scottish economy is appearing at long last to be on an upwards trajectory, and a fundamental and necessary ingredient of the growth part of the business cycle is confidence. And the opportunity of next year's referendum is steadily becoming apparent that a contributory factor in this growing confidence, which will in turn help us to reach an escape velocity in which our enterprise companies will thrive and will at long last throw off the drag
Mackenzie, you must finish.
of the economic incompetence of the UK Government. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm afraid if members go over the time, then a member will have to be dropped out of this debate. I call Malcolm Chisholm to be followed by Chick Brodie.
Presiding Officer, I shall try to introduce a little balance to the debate following the hyperbole of the last speaker. But in the interest of balance, I of course recognise and support many of the priorities and successes of the enterprise agencies. But equally, I think it is important to identify the problems and the gaps that justify Jenny Mara's call for a review. Now, on the former, of course, there are many of the activities of the enterprise agencies that I welcome. If I can mention, for example, the focus on offshore renewables, which I hope in due course will benefit my own constituency. I recognise that Scottish Enterprise is making a great contribution to that. And equally, in terms of internationalisation, I was happy to recognise the successes there when we had our debate on Scotland and China. And finally, and most importantly in the context of today's debate, and I know the Labour Party more generally, does welcome the focus on growing business and account management. And of course, one reason why we support that is because we started it. We instituted that through the Smart, Successful Scotland strategy of 2001, which was centred on the idea of growing businesses. So the principle of that we absolutely accept. And since the report came out evaluating that this week, I think it is right that we are focusing on that to a large extent in the debate. I hope in his wind-up the Minister will answer the question that John Swinney didn't answer in the budget statement when I asked him what would the effect be of the transfer from revenue to capital of £41.8 million in the enterprise budgets next year. Now, I don't necessarily say that's a good or a bad thing, because I don't know what the precise detail of that is, but I just have a suspicion that account management must have a large resource budget, and I just worry that there may be an effect from that transfer on account management. So perhaps the Minister will explain that in his wind-up. Now, the report that came out this week was in its way quite a balanced document. I would point out, by the way, to the Minister that on page 114 it says the common perception that Scottish Enterprise actively manages 2,000 plus companies is inaccurate. I think he will remember saying that in his speech, but in a sense that's a quibble and a detail. I think the more basic point to make about it is you've got to think of the context of that report, because the evaluators are going out to talk to the people who get a great deal of help from Scottish Enterprise. It's as if someone was to do a survey of my constituents and identify the people that I've given the most help to in the last year, and I'm sure 90% of them would say he's great. Now, whether 90% of all my constituents do it, far be it from me to say, but members can get the distinction. So that's just part of the methodology of the report. They're talking to those people who got support. And of course, one of the concerns of the study from the Enterprise Committee, was it 2 years ago, was that that companies with the potential to grow could be left out in the cold, which I think was the point that Murdo Fraser made in his intervention. And that report was especially worried about the gap that might exist between the business gateway and account management. In a kind of way, that's what's picked up in the evaluation report. I give way.
Minister.
I think Mr Chisholm makes many good points, and I'm happy to pursue some of them, but I just wanted to suggest to him and other members that if you come across any company that you think should have account managed services and write to me, then I will make sure that that is fully investigated.
Malcolm Chisholm.
The Minister is helpful as ever. Thank you for that. But I was going on to say, because the next word that I've written down is review. The very report we are focusing on this week talks about reviewing the Business Gateway pipeline to consider whether pipeline companies have access to the level of support needed. And it's not the only place in this week's report that uses the word review. So I don't think, in a sense, people should be that surprised what Jenny Mara is proposing. She's not just proposing it because of the report this week, which in general is, as I've said, perhaps too favourable to Scottish Enterprise. But they are talking about reviewing several aspects of what does happen currently. So I think ministers and indeed Murdo Fraser should bear that in mind. And the report this week is worried about the slow transition from the Business Gateway Growth Pipeline to account management, and also about the limited churn in the account management portfolio. So lots of issues and concerns are raised by the report, while also having the positive reports. And a couple of other points I would mention is that a majority of the improvements are generated by a small group of companies. I was surprised to read that 10% of companies deliver half of the gross value added. So again, that's great, but it does remind us that there are a lot of other companies who are either not making the same progress or indeed not being helped at all. Now, I'm in my last minute, so I can't make all the other points that I wanted to make, but I was struck by the report also saying that Scottish Enterprise needs to improve its internal data capture and monitoring systems, which connected in my mind with some of the equality issues, because in the business plan there's a little paragraph about how they're very much focused on equality, but there is very little indication of that either in their business plan or in the evaluation report. And indeed, if we were to go by the pictures in their business plan, there would be few, if any, women-led businesses in Scotland, which is not the case. So I think Scottish Enterprise does need to focus on that to a greater extent, but also to capture that data so that it's focused on equality issues as well as on the issue of growing companies and growing the economy.
Many thanks. I now call Chick Brodie to be followed by Maureen Mott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Nothing but nothing, Presiding Officer, and I say this from years of domestic and international business experience, nothing, well almost nothing, makes the blood flow more than entrepreneurial success. The concept, the designs, the development, the making, the engineering of both hard and soft products, and above all, the marketing, the selling and the servicing of the same are an infusion that makes you want more. So unsurprisingly, Presiding Officer, I support the main thrust of the motion today. I do, however, place a question mark over the implied emergence of global economic recovery, and if Mr Fraser will just bear with me, I will get to the enterprise issue in a minute. Recent predictions of a slowdown in Chinese and Indian GDP and a slowing in the US employment aligned to inflation forecasts puts one somewhat in the Jeremiah camp. Here in the UK, Osborne-esque ebullience on the economy is just that, it's a fig leaf. And if I may address that particular issue to Margaret McDougall, total debt in the UK, personal, public and corporate, stands at £1.40 for every pound we earn. That's down from £1.60 over the last year, but is now set to rise again because of a house mortgage lending instead of the diversion of investment lending as intended through much needed access to finance for our SMEs. Here comes another housing bubble, just in time for the next Westminster election. Now, leaving the Jeremiah instinct aside, that does, however, provide Scotland with a divergent economic opportunity to be realised via its various good enterprise networks after a yes vote next year. And while it will be easy, as some will to be critical, constructive criticism should be set against a generally improving scenario because of anti-austerity actions, as were manifest in the excellent budget today. Since 2007, of the 18,160 newly born enterprises, 54.7% of them have survived thus far, 6 years later, in what were harsh economic conditions. That's 2.7% above the UK average. In Scotland, there were 2,215 more new business starts in 2011 than there were in 2009. In Dundee, there were 10 more, and in Perth and Kinross, there were 40. Importantly, in South Ayrshire, it was up 25. And in terms of the demise of enterprise over the same period, Scotland's numbers fell from 15,085 to 14,110. And again, in Dundee, from 320 to 300, and in Perth and Kinross, from 480 to 440, and importantly, again, in South Ayrshire, from 335 to 290. So, in general, despite the environment, performance is up. Recovery in Scotland is working in face of Westminster austerity. All data, of course, is courtesy of ONS. Now, are we complacent? Of course we're not. Can the agencies deliver even greater efficiency in national economic growth? We heard this morning from witnesses in the EET of the need for greater localism and better communications between Business Gateway and other agencies. The varied locational and organisational construction of the Business Gateways provides, in some cases, a patchy approach to cohesion and fit with the national enterprise strategy. I feel sure, however, that that will be addressed in the not-too-distant future. There is little doubt, Presiding Officer, however, that Scottish Enterprise and Scottish Development International each have played a very significant part in Scotland's current anti-austerity situation, a very significant part in Scotland's positive reaction to rebutting what has been the advance of industrial and commercial recession. Also, their role in raising Scotland's international profile, underwritten by the Ernst & Young report declaring that Scotland is the place in the UK to be for inward investment. Our stock is higher, our profile and quality is higher, our export potential and performance continues to rise. The enterprise's pursuit of the government's economic strategy, concentrating and focusing on winning sectors, is a totem to management, to people and organisation to focus, and indeed to what is and will be an exciting entrepreneurial journey. Presiding Officer, although not a formal, as yet, government enterprise network agency, it would be remiss of me not to recognise the burgeoning social enterprise and third sector network, a sector which grew by 28% in the last 2 years.
Final minute.
That very important enterprise sector, with over 100 routes to finance, we were told this morning, actually 335 routes to finance, and with its need for meaningful business support, is increasingly a key enterprise network. And with the impending public procurement bill, the community empowerment bill, even more and more important as the days go along. Presiding Officer, in the face of the most titanic of recessions, Scotland has been open for business, and the contribution of the enterprise agencies, all of them, notwithstanding their ongoing review of efficiencies in organisations, has been a bulwark in that particular effort.
Thank you very much. I now call Maureen Watt to be followed by Margaret McDougall.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to be called to speak in this debate, as it gives me an opportunity to highlight the huge contribution that companies in the North East contribute to the Scottish economy and, for now, to the UK economy, not just in the oil and gas sectors, but also in food and drink, and how Scottish enterprise has helped many of these companies. Presiding Officer, statistics announced over the last few weeks are impressive. Although still a long way to go, employment in Scotland is at its highest level in almost 5 years. Economic inactivity dropped by 20,000 over the last quarter, and we have the highest youth employment rate of any nation in the UK at 57.2% compared to the UK average of 49.8%. I believe that Scottish enterprise have played an important role in driving economic growth in the Scottish economy, and its ambition is to grow the number of companies under its account-managed arm. 300 of those account-managed companies are within the oil and gas sector, and around 250 in the food and drink industry, 46 of those in the city of Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. An example of the help Scottish enterprise has given is to Hydrosun in my constituency, and indeed where the First Minister launched the oil and gas strategy. Hydrosun is a leading supplier of fluid connectors, hoses, fitting instrumentation and process control products, coupled with added value services, including integrity management, primarily to the oil and gas sector, but also to a wide range of secondary sectors, including petrochemical, marine and defence industries. Scottish enterprise has supported Hydrosun to export to 58 different countries, and interestingly in this regard it employs a number of linguists to help with that. It has helped with an acquisition in Brazil and to drive Hydrosun not only to export but to establish operational bases and manufacturing facilities in Angola and the United Arab Emirates. It also services the Gulf of Mexico oil industry and has partnership and distribution agreements in Egypt and Thailand, a truly impressive growth helped by Scottish enterprise. So while Scottish enterprise has helped account manage this and other companies, they have not helped these companies on their own. They've worked with Scottish Development International with the exports and with local universities on R&D. What I found interesting at the quarterly meetings that politicians in the North East have with Scottish Enterprise Grampian has been that many of the meetings have been at the premises of these account-managed companies, and that the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, and the advice that's been given hasn't just been sectoral. Indeed, middle managers were initially sceptical about having management skills training with colleagues from other industries, but this proved very worthwhile, and I'm sure wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been with the help and cooperation of Scottish Enterprise. Working with other organisations has been particularly evident in the food and drink sector. The Food and Drink Innovation Service is based within the Rowett Research Institute in Aberdeen and directly supports food and drink companies seeking to exploit the burgeoning market for healthy food and drink products, estimated to be worth $20 billion in the UK and more than $300 billion globally. In this, Scottish Enterprise works with Scotland Food and Drink and, for example, the James Hutton Institute in my constituency and its crop research arm in Dundee, who have helped with soft fruit production, in introducing new products, and obviously also with other food and drink sectors. Presiding Officer, Minister, I'm particularly interested in how small to medium-sized companies grow their businesses and access the skills of our university graduates and future apprentices. I think the ScotGrad scheme has much merit, but I think it needs much more publicity. I also believe that there needs to be more coordination between Business Gateway and Scottish Enterprise about driving companies into greater growth, as has been mentioned by many colleagues.
Final minute.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In conclusion, I think Scottish Enterprise are on the right track, and no one I've met in Scottish Enterprise is in any way complacent or think that they cannot continue to improve their service to the Scottish economy and Scottish company. Is this study not an independent review, which I'm sure Scottish Enterprise can build on?
Thank you very much. I call Margaret McDougall to be followed by Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Scotland's enterprise agencies are a vital tool to aid Scotland meet the economic challenges we face. They are integral to creating a sustainable economy which fosters innovation and investment. While I welcome the publication of the Evaluation of Scottish Enterprise Engagement with Account Management Companies report, this report was commissioned by Scottish Enterprise, so it is fairly self-congratulatory. As Jenny Mara said, Scottish Enterprise hasn't been independently reviewed since 2007, and I support calls for this to happen. If it was scrutinised by, say, Audit Committee, it could be established just how well or otherwise Scottish Enterprise is performing in the delivery of the Scottish Government's economic strategy. The report states that the account management model used by enterprise agencies is proving effective, providing value for money and should remain largely unchanged. As the Minister said, 80% of those who took part in the telephone survey are not confident that they would be able to source comparable support from anywhere other than Scottish Enterprise. One issue raised time and time again by SMEs and again in the EET committee this morning was the access to finance. The report states that it has been increasingly difficult for many companies to obtain bank loans and/or overdraft facilities to manage cash flow issues or facilitate growth. In the area I represent, Sercon Support Services Limited is a very successful award-winning small business and is in fact used by Scottish Enterprise as a model of best practice. You'd expect such a company would be able to get funding to expand, yet they struggle to find further investment funding. It's worrying when such a strong company, supported by Scottish Enterprise, is putting forward a robust business case but is being rejected by funders. It begs the question how many smaller, less well-established companies are being rejected too. We need to do more to make sure support is on hand for small and medium businesses who are finding it hard to secure funding from banks due to stricter lending criteria or simply because banks are risk adverse. Banks need to be clearer on what sectors they will support and what they are looking for from business plans. I'm pleased to say Sercon did eventually secure funding, but it was a very long, protracted process with many disappointments along the way. Both the Scottish Government and enterprise agencies need to do more to support businesses when applying to banks for loans, particularly where they provide a direct economic benefit to the area, such as Sercon, not only to safeguard, but by creating employment opportunities. Perhaps the Minister can tell me today what the Scottish Government and Scottish Enterprise are doing to address these issues. What is being done, and would it be possible to extend the lending portfolio of enterprise agencies to make sure that companies, especially start-up and smaller businesses, can access much-needed finances to grow or become better established? And it's not just financial support that SMEs need, it is advice on managerial issues and accountancy and a whole broad spectrum of advice. There is also a need to focus in areas of high unemployment, such as North Ayrshire, which, according to the Scottish Enterprises statistics from April 2012 to March 2013, only had 2 companies that are considered to have growth prospects out of 268 in Scotland. Will more support be considered for areas that are economic black spots? That said, according to the report from 2008-09 to 2011-12, the account management model has contributed to £1.11 billion of additional economic value to the Scottish economy, and its Scottish Enterprise has created and/or safeguarded 15,130 jobs, as the Minister stated earlier. We just need to make sure this support is better targeted, perhaps towards women and minority groups, and perhaps more towards SMEs rather than higher growth companies.
Final minute.
I have seen the direct benefit of enterprise agencies safeguarding jobs within my area. Highlands and Islands Enterprise have played an integral part in stopping the closure of the University Marine Biological Station at Millport by working along with the Field Studies Council, North Ayrshire Council and the Cumbria Community Development Company and the wider community to secure its future. There is no doubt the closure of the marine station would have devastated the local economy, while the loss of 30 quality jobs and up to £2 million removed from the local economy. To conclude, while there is some evidence that Scottish Enterprise is supporting the economy, there remains questions on whether it could perform better, particularly in the respect of support to small and start-up businesses, as well as in areas of direct economic need. I support the Labour amendment.
Thank you very much. I call Kevin Stewart to be followed by Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I had the great pleasure of spending a large part of last week offshore Europe at the Aberdeen Exhibition and Conference Centre, which hosted well over 50,000 delegates and played host to well over 1,500 stands with companies who were multinational and companies who were very small, some of which were just starting out. I know that the Minister spent quite a lot of time there. I know that because I saw the Minister there, and beyond that, as I went round during the course of the 2 days that I managed to go there, many folks had said that they had the opportunity to speak directly to him, and I think that that was very much appreciated. Now, obviously, there are the big players in that market, but there are also those small companies that I was talking about, and some are moving away from their former traditional markets to enter into the oil and gas field. Now, one of the questions which I always ask when I visit companies is what their relationship is with Scottish Enterprise, whether or not they've got account managers, what their relationship is with the local council's economic development team. And, you know, doing the same thing a number of years ago as a councillor, the reports back about Scottish enterprise were normally unfavourable. That has changed dramatically. And while there is always room for improvement, I think that what the system that we have now is much better than it was previously. I would make one plea in terms of some of the small companies from out with the northeast of Scotland who are trying to break into oil and gas, and I'm showing that I'm not completely and utterly parochial here by doing so, is that sometimes account managers from elsewhere in the country don't have the oil and gas experience of those who are based in the northeast of Scotland. And I would like to see some flexibility and a use of resource a little bit better than currently is. And I think that would be a great boon to current account managers if they were to get that back up, and an even greater boon to the companies who are trying to break out of their traditional markets into oil and gas. I'm also very enthused that the Visit Scotland Expo is coming to Aberdeen in April 2015, which will showcase the best of Scottish tourism, and will have tour operators and travel agents from around 40 different countries, from as far afield as India, Russia, and the Middle East, as well as North America and Europe. And I think that these kind of events are also the time when Scottish enterprise often comes to the fore, because this may be a tourism event, it may be there to help boost Scottish tourism and Aberdeen as a tourist destination, but beyond that, many folk who will be there, I am quite sure, will be wanting to do business in this country. I've listened very carefully to what some others have said, and I think that sometimes, no matter what side of the constitutional argument you're on, you know, sometimes in this place there can be a downplaying of how well we are doing. And an article from The Economist on the 31st of August entitled "Foreign Investment Catching the Scots, Why England Trails the Celtic Fringe" is well worth the reading. In that article, it says Ernst & Young blames government policy, this is south of the border. In 2010, the coalition announced that England's 9 regional development agencies would be replaced by 39 local enterprise partnerships, voluntary consortiums of local councils and businesses. This was done 2 years later. It seems to have made things worse. This is the author of that article speaking. It goes on. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, where devolved administrations run economic development, the agencies are undisturbed. It says, Scotland is simply better at coordinating different arms of local and central government to deliver what inward investors want: roads for new factories, planning permissions, training packages for workforces and the like. I don't know if this is true or not, and I don't know if the Minister will confirm this in his summing up. I'm in my last minute. But it says, a Scottish Government Minister cracks the whip at any laggards. Edward Twiddy, who's the Chief Executive of the North East LEP covering Tyneside and Durham, enviously admires his northern counterparts, so saith the article. But, it says, his Celtic competitors are well ahead and they show no signs of slowing down. I think that we can power ahead even further in that regard if we had the full levers of power of a normal independent parliament. And I'm quite sure if the Minister had that power, we would be doing even better than we currently are. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. I call Tavish Scott to be followed by Christian Allard.
Thank you very much. Can I just say gently to Kevin Stewart, after that great tribute to The Economist magazine, that of course there was another article in The Economist magazine which also featured a front page all about independence, which he didn't quote, and he might not have been quite so keen to quote in the context of his exposition of what a wonderful magazine The Economist is. So perhaps we should always take these arguments in the round. This debate, you've had your say, Kevin, and we listened with great interest, but not a lot of thought to what you said. There's been an awful lot this afternoon from Mr Stewart's benches of running down England, which I think is a bit of an unfortunate side to this debate, but I suppose we'll just have to put up with it for the next year. That's what we're going. We're now in the independence budget. This is the debate on the independence nature of the enterprise networks, and that's what it's going to be like. I mean, I take Maureen Watt's point about the clear direction given to the enterprise networks. That's absolutely true, and actually that's why I think the Labour amendment isn't actually the point about this debate. There's never been clear direction for all the quangos and agencies in Scotland. They absolutely are told what to do by the government of the day. Now, you can like that or not like it, but that is the nature of the quango state that we have in Scotland today. It's absolutely controlled from the centre, and the challenge function that I remember well as a minister in both the Scottish Enterprise Board and the Highlands Islands Enterprise Board doesn't exist in the same way to this day, and that's not just my assessment of it, it's also what board members have told me privately. Of course, they can't possibly say those things publicly. Yeah, give way. Yeah.
Jenny Mara.
I thank Tavish Scott for giving way. Would you agree with me that the point of my intervention is not to make a point about the leadership or whether it's government, led or not? The point of the amendment is to say that a robust institution like SE that is performing well should not fear further scrutiny to check that public money is being spent most effectively and going to support the businesses that need it the most.
Tavish Scott.
Well, let me make a parliamentary point to that reasonable argument from Jenny Mara. I think the last thing Scotland should do at a time of difficult public spending cuts is spend yet more money on consultants and big KPMG organisations who'd undoubtedly be commissioned to do that kind of work. If Parliament did its job properly, then I'm not about to say Mr Fraser's committee is not doing its job properly, but Parliament's job is, of course, to scrutinise that kind of thing. If people want reviews of enterprise companies, if they want reviews of the structure in this place, they should get the parliamentary committee to take it on and conduct a full, proper investigation into these things, because that's, in fairness, what has happened in the past. If Parliament didn't do much of a job with that, well, maybe we should look at ourselves, rather than always assuming that the right thing to do would be to employ expensive external consultants to look at other areas of public policy. Now, I'm going to come to you, Mr Mackenzie, because you made some really silly points, and I want to come back to yours. But I want to, Mr Ewing was in good principle there of looking for ideas. Well, let me take one idea to him that relates to Scottish enterprise. As I'm sure he is aware, there is a very considerable movement worldwide now to invest in high-speed rail. And the interesting aspect of this from a Scottish perspective is is not so much in the track, but is in what the track sits on. And here in Scotland, through Heriot-Watt University, we have a centre of world excellence in this, which Scottish enterprise have had a small look at, and I thank them for that interest. Now, our challenge is not about the engineering of how a train goes much more quickly. It is in the existing track testing. And there's a station at Heriot-Watt, which is, as I say, a global centre of excellence. Now, they have just signed, presiding officer, a memorandum of understanding with Atkins, the major engineering international business, which can take this into a whole new dimension. Indeed, the Chief Executive Officer of Atkins said on the 19th of July at the signing of that memorandum, with 15,000 miles of new high-speed track worldwide due to be laid in the next decade, we can have that centre of excellence, which is a go-to place for design and testing of new ideas, such as the design of new shape of embankments. Now, I hope the Minister would encourage his other ministerial colleagues to visit that centre, to take a very active interest in that, which as yet hasn't happened at ministerial level. It has, I repeat, happened at Scottish enterprise level, and I'm grateful for that, but it needs some ministerial interest for the simple reason of this, that in the nationalist case of always running down England, I have to bring this piece of news to their attention. In the last UK government's Regional Growth Fund, they awarded monies to the University of Huddersfield and to the Centre of Innovation in Rail and the Institute of Rail Research for exactly this kind of work. So when people on the other benches always say that nothing good ever happens in England, there is an example of investing in rail in England, and here we could do it in Scotland as well. well. And while Scottish Enterprise has shown some interest in it, we haven't yet had any ministerial involvement in that whatsoever here in our capital city of Scotland. And all I plead with the Minister is maybe he could show some leadership where his colleagues haven't and have a very close and encouraging look at that. One other point I wanted to make, Presiding Officer, was on oil and gas. I don't think Mike Mackenzie can ever listen to anything Fergus Ewing says, because when the latest investment numbers were published by the UK Oil and Gas, the first press release I saw that morning was Mr Ewing saying what an outstanding success it was. It was all down to the very considerable work that was being done. No, I'm dealing
the members
with
concluding.
It was all down to the very useful work that the Scottish and UK government had been making. Mr Ewing was at pains to press that point, and I applaud him for that. So I don't quite know where Mr Mackenzie was when those world-leading UK investment figures were being announced, and I don't recognise his description of the UK oil and gas industry. I think we should talk up rather than using the kind of examples that he did in his arguments. But possibly I could just conclude, Presiding Officer, with a thought that when the decommissioning round continues in the North and North Sea, which is going on right at this time, that Mr Ewing and his ministerial colleagues will concentrate very hard on the supply chain, because that's where there's a great potential for Scottish jobs, both in the Highlands Islands enterprise area and in the Scottish enterprise area as well.
Thank you very much. I now call Christian Allard to be followed by Ken McIntosh.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First of all, I would like to comment on some of the contributions some members have made so far. I disagree with most of what Tavish said. There is something I would agree with. It's why this review. It seems to me that, like Mike Mackenzie said, that this review will be only to try to help other nations in the United Kingdom to understand how well we are doing here in Scotland. And I'm a bit dubious in what the purpose will be. Anyway, I'm delighted to speaking today because it's given me another opportunity to promote my own region, the North East of Scotland, even if Maureen Watt and Kevin Stewart has already done a lot of that. It's really astonishing to see the improvement that have been made over the years to support the many businesses that make the North East such a fantastic place to live and work. I hear many of the speakers today, some of them in the other benches, telling us that we can do much more. And I agree, we must always strive to do better in this global economy. However, the place that Scotland occupies today in the world is truly astonishing. We are recognized and appreciated in many sectors and punching well above our weight. From personal experience, I can illustrate that it was not true 25 years ago. Picture this: a young Frenchman in his 20s decided to offer a new seafood haulage service from Scotland to Spain, an opportunity for many small and medium seafood companies across Scotland wanting to open up new markets. To my surprise, the promotion of the new service was led by Food from Britain, FFB. I was asked to come down to London to launch the service, a service that had nothing to do with London. I spoke at the event but struggled to recognize any faces and was introduced to people who had no interest in the project. Food from Britain, FFB, created in the 80s to promote export of UK-produced food and drink, lost all its funding from DEFRA back in 2008, and rightly so. Today, it's a different picture. Scotland's enterprise agencies are playing a vital role in building the capability of Scottish producers. The Food and Drink Steering Group, led by Scottish Enterprise and with representation from Scotland Food and Drink, the Scottish Government and Visit Scotland, is ensuring that the food and drink offering is a priority at events such as the Commonwealth Games, the Ryder Cup and Homecoming. The result of this effort is clear for all to see, and the boom in the Scottish food and drink sector looks set to continue with the help of all these agencies. The North East is at the heart of it, producing a fantastic array of food and drink products. And again, it was not always the case. On Monday, I was in Olmedrum in Aberdeenshire, visiting a vibrant distillery run by someone who understands better than most how much Scotland's exports should be celebrated. If you visit the distillery, please do make sure to pronounce his name correctly, or Kenny, the manager, will be quick to point out that Glengarry is the name of one of Scotland's oldest distilleries. Kenny told me that in mid-90s, the distillery had to stop production and to shut down, unable to sell its stock. Now the distillery is booming, helped by a lot of the government agencies, producing and exporting like never before, filling around 100 casks of the finest malt whisky per week. We are truly moving forward as a nation. Scotland as a brand is now being used in everything Scotland's enterprise agencies do, and with great success. It's not by accident that figures published this week show that the Scottish food and drinks industry has met its turnover goal 6 years ahead of schedule, with a turnover of more than 13 billion in 2011 against a target of 12.5 billion by 2017. The plan is to do more, and 2015 will be the year of Scotland's food and drink, another way to promote the best of Scotland. As you can see, I love food, and I love it to be Scottish and bought locally. Last Sunday, I went to the Huntly Hearts Food and Farming Festival with Dennis Robertson, another event which is promoted by Scottish government agencies. The constituency, Dennis Robertson is the constituency MSP for Aberdeenshire West. In its 5th year, the event is a great place for promoting and showcasing local food produce and kick-started the Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight in the North East. While Dennis held a surgery in the town hall, I sat in front of a full plate of stovies at the Gordon's Arms Hotel. We know how to make stovies in Huntly. After all, it is where the World Stovies competition takes place every year. On Sunday, for the first time, a man won the trophy. Another highlight this year at the start of the Scottish Food and Drink Fortnight in the North East was the Dundee Flower and Food Festival. Glengarry Distillery participated in the well-attended event and recorded much interest for their malt whisky. Me too, I went to Offshore Europe 2013. Like Kevin Stewart, I met a lot of the government-led organisations, and one of them would have been Visit Scotland. And Visit Scotland had a special stall with a new app from My Aberdeen, and I would encourage any members who wants to visit Aberdeen to go into this app to make sure they can find all the best food and all the best accommodation that the North East can bring. So there is a big challenge in the energy sector.
I'm afraid you're over your time. Please come to a conclusion.
Yes, thank you. The North East is a great place, as I said, to learn, to work, to visit and to eat. And we, with Scottish Enterprise and other organisations, need to be ready to do much more, as a yes vote in 2014 will open many doors for our skills and expertise, our produce and our global brand, Scotland.
Thank you very much. Now call Ken McIntosh, to be followed by Stuart Stevenson, whose time may have to be reduced.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sure the Minister will take heart from the fact that I think all members and parties will be supporting the government motion before us today. There will be few people in Scotland, let alone in this chamber, who would not wish Scotland's enterprise agencies to play a vital role in securing economic recovery. I'm sure we're all delighted to hear that the account management system introduced at Scottish Enterprise is working well. Now, it is true that we should say well done to an organisation and, more importantly, to its staff when they do well. But given the size and the scale of the difficulties facing the Scottish economy, is the message we want the Scottish Parliament to be sending out today to be one of congratulations? Given the fact that the output of our economy is still below that of 5 years ago, given the level of unemployment facing our country, particularly that facing young people, given the squeeze on nearly every family's income through wage freezes, overtime bans and increases in the cost of living, does it not feel a little complacent, or at least a little premature, to be patting ourselves on the back at this stage? I'd certainly hate to think of Mr Ewing or his colleague Mr Swinney taking a leaf out of George Osborne's book and after 5 years of recession looking at some modest signs of recovery and thinking that he's vindicated and his work is now done. Perhaps if the Minister is tempted to do so, he might model himself, rather than George Osborne, take a look at the more admirably cautious Vince Cable. And if he's not doing that, may I remind him today that there are 10,000 Scots more out of work following the news today. Now, I have no doubt that the staff at Scottish and Highlands and Islands Enterprise are working assiduously to grow the economy and to help business and industry. But here in the Scottish Parliament, might we not play a more productive role ourselves if we were to examine more objectively the difference those organisations are actually making to the Scottish economy, the value added, as it were, and how that could be improved? A quick glance at the companies currently receiving grants from our enterprise companies for example, reveals a number of familiar names: KPMG, Honeywell, Hutchison 4G. Now, admirable organisations all, I am sure, but also highly successful, highly profitable global multinationals. Is it really right that we, that is the taxpayer, are giving financial support likely to end up in the shareholders of those multinational companies? In fact, I also noted that Scottish and Southern Energy received more than £1 million from the Scottish Government, while simultaneously being fined £10.5 million by Ofgem for mis-selling. Now, I have no particular beef with any of the companies I've just named, but I do question whether more locally based, Scottish-owned, small and medium-sized businesses might prove to be a more worthwhile recipient of our support.
Minister.
Could I reassure Ken Macintosh that all emoluments paid from taxpayers' money to any company are based on the strict application of laws which apply and are especially directed towards job creation? In other words, the money is only paid when the jobs are created. That essentially is the principle which applies here, and a principle which I believe has created a great deal of employment. So unless Mr Macintosh is able to suggest which grants should not have been made, I'm wondering what the purpose of this criticism is.
Ken Macintosh.
A specific example, if I may, because I received a letter this very week from the company Amazon. And as the Minister will know, many of us in Parliament, many of those who are employed, denied full employment rights by this company, many hard-pressed local businesses who are faced with closure because of competition from Amazon are dismayed that we are handing over millions of pounds to a company that doesn't pay its own fair share of taxes. Now, the letter I received from Amazon admits to being awarded approximately £4 million worth of grants in the past 5 years from Scottish Enterprise. I'm not sure whether that sum includes the taxpayer subsidy towards the cost of land, but either way, it is a substantial sum of money. My own letter to Amazon asked a number of questions, but included specifically how many staff work for Amazon in Scotland on so-called zero-hours contracts. And my favourite sentence in the reply is the following, and I quote, "The vast majority of temporary associates in our fulfilment centres work a 40-hour week, and we are working with our employment agencies to guarantee all temporary associates at least 20 hours per week." Now, I am sure we all know the euphemisms that are used to disguise or temper the more brutal truth. But I wonder how many of those working in a high-security warehouse, denied recognition of their own trade union membership, think they're employed in a fulfilment centre. I asked about 0 hours, a euphemism in itself for the denial of employment rights. The reply talks of temporary associates. Let's not allow ourselves to be sweet-talked into accepting jobs at any price. Or worse, paying for jobs that would have to come here anyway. Given Amazon's need to supply goods throughout the length and breadth of Scotland, I cannot believe they would not have pressed ahead with their so-called fulfilment centre without government support. Presiding Officer, again, without wishing to be overly critical of either agency, does the Minister also not share a further concern I would raise with them? Between them, Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands Enterprise have spent more than £50 million on severance pay over the past 5 years. That's £50 million spent not on hiring people, not on creating employment, not on finding jobs for the tens of thousands of Scots desperately seeking work, but £50 million to shove people out the door. Now, I find it difficult to see how this vast sum of money has contributed to the sustainability of our economy.
Mr Macintosh, please come to a conclusion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would ask the Minister too if he heard the work by the Cities Alliance this morning and to comment on the work of our local cities as engines of growth, but I urge the Minister to accept Labour's amendment in today's motion.
Many thanks. I now call Stuart Stevenson. I can give you 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I have a special interest in the Enterprise Network, as the constituency I represent is the only one that straddles both Highlands and Islands Enterprise and Scottish Enterprise. So in my constituency work, I have to deal with both. It is markedly different, the experience in Highlands and Islands, where at the centre of their activity is the social concerns, a much more business focus in the south of Scotland. I commend the Highlands and Islands Enterprise model to the rest of Scotland. I want to just talk about a couple of examples from elsewhere that might inform the debate to some extent. Our English friends don't necessarily get everything wrong. I have to say that. My English granny, who came from the northeast of England would not wish up there to hear me saying that down here. They are one of the areas in England that has suffered most from the Tories' abolition of the Westminster's abolition of the RDAs. One of the people I worked with when I was a minister was Andrew Adonis, the Labour Transport Minister at Westminster, a very effective minister he was. He is now working very closely with a group of local authorities in the northeast of England to try and fill that gap, produce economic reports, coordinate activities. And they're doing very well compared to doing nothing. But they're denied the tools, as the report that he's published makes clear, that would enable them to compete as effectively with Scotland as they would wish. Many people in the northeast of England are now looking to us to see what ways we can collaborate across that border, and I wish them well in that endeavour. I want to just say a word or two about Brazil. Brazil is now part of the BRIC annotation, Brazil, Russia, India and China, the next wave of successful economies that are going to come through the world in years to come. When I visited Brazil in 1982 for 8 days, Brazil was in very deep difficulties indeed. Indeed, in the 8 days I was there, the value of the Cruzeiro, their currency, halved. And by the time I got back home and received my credit card statement with my transactions from Brazil, what I actually had to pay was less than 1/5 of what actually the price had been when the transaction was conducted. The economy was in a difficult place. But what the government there was doing was recognising that capital investment was essential to get them out of the hole in which they were in. They supported, for example, a university engineering course that as an exercise was designing a commuter aircraft. That project led to Embraer aircraft. And Edinburgh Airport, Aberdeen Airport, Glasgow, all our major airports, you now see Embraer aircraft operating regional routes around Europe. Now a successful company. So out of adversity, the right investment policies by government through its enterprise agencies leads to some successful outcomes. Don't let's imagine, however, every investment will be successful. Indeed, it is necessary that we are not so risk-averse as to only invest in things that are certainties. We must be prepared to take some of our money and put it into slightly higher risks than we might otherwise do. Some of those will pay off big style, and we should be prepared to carry the can for those that don't, but prepared to make those investments.
Final minute. Presiding
Officer, Tavish Scott took a pop at the references to The Economist. I have to say it's an excellent newspaper. My wife used to write for The Economist once a quarter, so I'm bound to say that. I do think it was deeply offensive to Scotland for them to put on their cover in the edition that Tavish Scott referred to, a map of Scotland with the label Skintland. It was actually quite disjoint from the article inside. I confess, you won't tell anyone that I did this, that for some months afterwards, whenever I went through a railway station, I moved The Economist behind other magazines. So ashamed was I that my people would be buying it. Presiding Officer, to use the word of the Minister, I've got oodles more, I could say. Would that I had the time to do so. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, and I apologise for having to curtail your time. We now turn to closing speeches. Can I remind members who have participated in this debate they should be in the chamber for closing speeches? I call on Alex Johnston with a very tight 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. This debate has been useful in that we've skirted around many of the points that concern the current position of the enterprise networks and the direction we should go on. At times we haven't dealt with them in a very great depth, but I think we have subjects out there that have been properly aired. However, I have to say that when I read the motion in the name of the Minister, which I will be voting for later, I think he is a bit ungenerous when he mentions the emerging signs of the global economic recovery and Scotland's vital role. forgets that, of course, in reality, we are at this moment surfing a wave of UK recovery. And if we were not part of that UK economy, we may actually be suffering some of the ill effects that other European countries are suffering today. And it's that failure to regard the importance of the relationship that has been the theme of the day. In fact, earlier today, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Sustainable Growth delivered his budget statement, which, in my view, was a responsible, balanced and, within his own policy priorities, a sound statement. Then he spoiled it all by saying that he only did so because of the fiscal discipline imposed on him by the Scottish Block Grant. And that if he were not subject to that discipline, he would break the bank, blow the budget and reverse every one of the hard-earned gains of the last 3 years. So it is with Fergus Ewing and many of his backbenchers who have chosen today to take the opportunity to take sideswipes at the UK and the UK economy and destroy what could have been a reasonably consensual debate. However, turning to the amendment in the name of Jenny Mara, I have to say that we on this side of the chamber will find that difficult to support. A root and branch review of our enterprise network at this stage would, in my view, be a mistake. It's very important to recognise the radical changes which have happened over a period of time and recognise also that reviewing the enterprise network has been a significant part of that. But at the same time, I believe a responsible minister, and I believe we have a responsible minister, will keep the network constantly under review and ensure that in addressing the needs of that network, he will do so in a constructive manner. In fact, in his opening speech, he made it quite clear that during this debate and subsequently, he is seeking ideas and willing to work together with others. Turning to the amendment in the name of my colleague Murdo Fraser, it has to be said that there are some concerns about the intermediary technology institutes and their performance, and the offer once again made by the Minister is one which is welcome. However, he also raised the subject of the tendency of the enterprise network over the years to indulge in the practice of picking winners. And of course, we don't want to see the enterprise network decide who will succeed and who will fail. We want it to pick the organisations, the companies, which will deliver the best for the Scottish economy, the best growth, the best employment and the best returns in the long term. And that's what concerns me most about the position that has been set out by the Labour Party today at some length by Margaret McDougall and supported by Ken McIntosh in some respects. They want to pick companies not on the basis of their potential to succeed for Scotland, but perhaps on the basis of geography or social criteria or perhaps even gender, I think was suggested. Not so much picking winners as, in some cases, perhaps deliberately picking losers. And if that's the kind of review they want of the enterprise network, then I will not be prepared to address that. Sorry, I want to carry on and complete my remarks. There are one or two other people who have spoken during this debate who I think are worthy of note, not least of which my sparring adversary, Kevin Stewart, who began his remarks by saying that he didn't want us to indulge in downplaying our successes. Well, when it comes to Kevin Stewart, as they say, but John Lewis, he is never knowingly undersold. But I have to say that he then went on and indulged in a discourteous critique of our neighbours and how they perform. Perhaps it's important that we take the opportunity to recognise the importance of the relationship we have with our friends on the other side of the border and not indulge in that sort of activity. If he's not going to sit down, I'm going to have to hear what he says, but quickly.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you very much. I think the Economist article quite clearly showed that those in the North East were a little bit jealous of what goes on here. I think after independence, they will refocus their attention to north of the border rather than to London. And let's help them boost their economy too after that.
I think Kevin Stewart should, as was suggested by another speaker, read the whole of The Economist, not just the bits he likes.
30 seconds left.
And taking that other speaker into account, it has to be said that Tavish Scott offered an interesting interpretation interpretation of the situation, one which I would largely support. However, I did at one point think he was going to propose building a high-speed railway to Shetland, something that even an independent Scotland might find hard to swallow. So with that said, it is the intention of the Conservatives to support the Government amendment, to seek support for our own amendment, but we will unfortunately not be able to support Labour's amendment during the course of the vote.
Thank you very much. And to now call on Jenny Marr, a maximum 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Labour Party will tonight be supporting the Government's motion and also our own and the Conservative amendment, despite the remarks from Alex Johnson just there. And I would like to clarify for him that myself and my colleagues were not advocating that Scottish Enterprise selects businesses to support on anything other than their potential for economic growth and their contribution to our economy. He particularly pointed out what I said about gender, and I would draw this information to his attention again, because it was the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. Now, they didn't say that we should, that Scottish Enterprise should invest in businesses to necessarily just on the basis of just putting more women into work. The evidence they produced was that 0.5% of modern apprenticeship schemes are being taken up by disabled people in Scotland, despite the fact that 8% of 16 to 24-year-olds have a disability. Less than 2% of modern apprenticeships are taken up by ethnic minorities, despite the fact that 4% of 16 to 24-year-olds are from an ethnic minority. So this is evidence that actually opportunities are not equal across our society, and I think that is a point bearing in mind. Now, the evaluation published on Monday does go some way to demonstrate that Scottish Enterprise adds to our economy and the high levels of support they give to business in Scotland. However, we believe also provides an opportunity to take a pulse check, as I said, on how these agencies interact with one another, with local and national government and with business in Scotland. Because since 2007, Minister, since the economy was buoyant then, there has been no substantial government-led review of our enterprise agencies, despite a rapidly changing Scottish economy, despite a rapidly changing economic landscape that could need new solutions. Not necessarily, but I think it's worth reviewing. We are now in a situation, as Ken McIntosh said, where long-term youth unemployment remains high. We heard this morning that an additional 32,000 16 to 24-year-olds in Scotland have come out of work over the summer. Unemployment among women is rising, and workers are increasingly faced with little choice but to take part-time, temporary, or those contracts where you've got to wait for the phone to ring, the 0 hours contracts. And it is in our shared aim to get more young Scots into jobs, to support women in Scotland and offer every person and every business the support that they need. Now, I want to touch on some of the contributions in the debate today. Margaret McDougall, I think, made a very pertinent point about the plight of some small businesses in securing bank loans and how Scottish Enterprise can work with small businesses to help them in this process. And I wonder if perhaps that is a point that the Minister would be willing to address us in a reply or in a letter later on. Kevin Stewart spent time listing and congratulating the achievements of Scottish Enterprise, much of which I agree with. But as I've said in this chamber before, I think it's robust and successful institutions that should not fear review, scrutiny and more suggestions on how they should operate better. It is healthy organisations that welcome a review process, and especially in the changed economy since 2007, should welcome that scrutiny. Now, Tavish Scott makes the point that we should not be commissioning reviews that could be expensive at a difficult economic time, and it's a point very well made. However, I would contend that it is a particularly appropriate time to review and assess and scrutinise an agency that is tasked with driving our economy in such a difficult economic time. We need to check that our precious public funds that are set aside for economic growth in this area have the most impact, that we are getting the highest return for each and every pound we spend. Now, Tavish Scott went on to suggest that committees of this Parliament could step up and do the job. Now, I know that the Conservatives are not supporting our amendment tonight, and I know that Murdo Fraser is sceptical of a review, but much of what he said in opening, I think, agreed with the purposes of a review, and I wonder if he might undertake a review of Scottish enterprise in the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. Yes, sir.
Chick Brodie.
Having made the point about your review, can you tell me what measurement parameters you expect to come out of this review and how they will interact, what assessment you will make of these? Is it rate of return, employment, investment? What parameters are you looking for?
Jenny Mara.
Well, I would say to the member that these parameters and measurables would be set by the experts that conduct these reviews. He knows as well as I am a politician, but I would leave it up to the experts to set down that criteria. But I think it should certainly be done. Now, Maureen Watt said, and I quote, "Is this study that was published on Monday not an independent review that Scottish enterprise can build on?" Now, unfortunately, I would say to the member, although Monday's report is useful, it is not an independent report. It was commissioned by Upper Quintile, a research group itself commissioned by Scottish Enterprise. And as Malcolm Chisholm pointed out, much of its findings were taken from those businesses who actually received support from Scottish Enterprise. An inquiry led by Murdo Fraser's committee would allow us to hear from those businesses who feel they need support, start-up businesses and fledgling initiatives to see if Scottish Enterprise is meeting their
Member
needs.
needs to bring a to close.
In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I move our amendment. I think it is time for a review, but I hope that the committees will also take heed of my suggestions. Thank you.
I now call on Fergus Ewing to wind up the debate. Mr Ewing, you've got till 5:29.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Let me thank everybody who has contributed to the debate, and in particular, welcome Jenny Mara and Murdo Fraser to the enterprise portfolio, a new face and an old hand. So I found the debate useful at times, and I'd like to cover and respond, if I may, to some of the specific contributions made. I think that's what I always try to do, so let me do this in no particular order. Ken McIntosh made a contribution which focused on whether or not grant payments should be made to some of the largest companies. Now, let me say to Ken McIntosh and two members of this chamber, RSA is not paid for 0 hours contracts. Okay, so let's just get that clear. Let no one leave this chamber with any belief that, or any implication that Mr McIntosh may have given or inference drawn from his speech that's the case. That's not the case, nor should it be the case. No, I've got a lot of ground to cover. I just want to make that point. No, well, I want to move on. That is the rule on RSA.
Mr McIntosh, the Minister's not taking an intervention.
Mentioned work that is being done at Heriot Watt and a memorandum of understanding with Atkins. I will contact Heriot Watt, Steve Chapman. I've had good relations with him, and indeed we played a little part in helping their tremendous success in establishing a campus at Putrajaya in the early days when I have had this portfolio. So I praise the efforts of Heriot Watt, and of course I will work with them, continue to work with them in that regard. Jake Brodie quite rightly mentioned the important role that the third sector and social enterprise play, and of course amongst the account managed companies are companies from these areas. Well, let me get through number of members, please. I don't have a lot of time, and I do want to show respect to the members who took part in the debate. One of whom was Margaret McDougall, and she raised the access to finance, and Jenny Mara has repeated the request that I respond to this, and that's perfectly correct. That's what debates, I think, are for. So, my response is that there's a fairly substantial, solid amount of work that we and the Enterprise Network do in relation to banks to encourage them to lend, to ascertain their policies, to help them engage with businesses. Scottish Enterprise intends to help during This year, 350 to 400 companies secure growth finance by improving their financial readiness. Mr Swinney and myself, the First Minister, have had regular meetings with bank representatives. That will continue, of course, and I will write to Margaret McDougall with a more comprehensive statement of the help we seek to provide. Access to finance is very important, but we should remember at the end of the day, banks make the decisions, not governments. And frankly, I don't think governments should be making the decisions, although we want banks to take better decisions. And I'd remind members that appeals against decisions of banks to reject lending have had a very high success rate. And that's something that I've drawn to the attention of MSPs in a letter fairly recently. Now, Jenny Mara and the Labour Party members in the debate made the suggestion there should be a review, and I have to say I wasn't persuaded before the debate that there is a case for review. Now the debate is taking place. I've listened with interest. A number of good points have been made. I appreciated the spirit in which Jenny Mara addressed her contribution, and I don't have a closed mind on this or really any other topics in relation to how we help people in Scotland tackle the problems that we face. However, let me just run through, and I'll have to give way to Jenny Mara at the end of a number of points which I've made here, which I think, to me, indicate that this is not the right time for such a review. Incidentally, the review in the motion is to be conducted by the Government, but towards the end of her contribution, she suggested that the review be carried out by a Scottish Government committee. Now, if a Scottish Government committee decides to hold a review, that's up to the committee. It's not up to the Government. But that did seem to be a shift in the approach. But be that as it may, let me run through 6 or 7 arguments. Firstly, I don't think that there are significant systemic failures in the system of delivering enterprise support. Were she able to point to any such failures, then I think perhaps there would be a case. But one would expect in a call for a major review to be accompanied by a forensic analysis of failures. The system is wrong, it's not working. That normally is why one has a review, but I do not think that applies in this case, nor do I think, with respect, that any such failings have been identified by members in this debate. Secondly, the Business Gateway delivery arrangements came into effect on the 1st of October last year, so they haven't been in place for a year yet. Surely, we don't want to disrupt the work that people have been doing when, in fact, the first year of the operation has not even yet been completed, far less any evaluation of that work. Thirdly, those new arrangements include a local development forum jointly chaired by myself and Stephen Hagan. We've met once. We will meet every 6 months or thereabouts, and I think that is a form of welcome scrutiny. Fifthly, there is a regular review of the BG pipeline companies involving an analysis by the Business Gateway, working with Scottish Enterprise, working with the companies themselves. I think it's fair to recognise that that review should do its work. And also, of course, companies in the pipeline don't necessarily ever become account-managed companies, because not all companies will achieve the level of success and growth which would be appropriate for account management. So not all companies will go through the end of the pipeline in that way. Fifthly, I think to have a review does cause an element of diversion and disruption of staff time. This is not the moment when we want to divert the time and attention of those who are working in the enterprise network away to the conduct of a government-instructed review. There is so much work to be done now, Presiding Officer. Work on task forces like Vion or FreshLink, work in Buckie shipyards, work in the open cast coal mining sector. There is work in relation to many administration and solvency positions. PACE are doing work around the country. There is also a lot of work in relation to positive opportunities. Now, if we divert the time of the leadership and the staff who are either in local authorities or in Scottish Enterprise, SDI, HIE or Visit Scotland into a major review, I don't think they would thank us. And I do believe that, not as a matter of any politics, but just as a sort of practicality and born of the experience of working with these excellent public servants every day of the week. So I'm happy to take an intervention from Jenny Mara, but I do not think a case for a review, a fundamental review of the enterprise delivery system has been made.
Jenny Mara.
I thank the Minister for giving way, and I thank him for his approach and saying he doesn't have a closed mind to this, because, Minister, businesses tell me that they have to constantly review what they are doing to make sure that they are competitive in our economy now. So should our institution that supports them after 6 years of the same practices not take a similar approach? It is not only when failure occurs that you need to review what you are doing. You need to take a pulse check constantly to check that you are meeting the needs of our economy.
Well, I can assure Jenny Mara that, of course, all of the enterprise agencies do review, consider, analyse and examine their own performance internally all the time and together with ministers. So that happens. But that, with respect, is different from having a fundamental review of the whole system. I do not believe that is the time for that, but I'm happy to continue to engage with Jenny Mara and all members in this topic in a cooperative fashion. Let me draw my remarks to a close, Presiding Officer, by paying tribute to all of those in the Enterprise Agency at its widest. Visit Scotland, who are playing a blinder for Scotland, who are winning international accolades, headed up by Malcolm Roughhead and Mike Cantley. Lena Wilson and Crawford Gillis, Alec Patterson and Lauren Creerer, and people you don't hear about, like David Rennie, who heads up the oil and gas team in Aberdeen. I work day and daily with all of these people. We recognise today, perhaps for the first time, in the detail of the work that they've done. We've had an opportunity to learn about that, and we thank them for their contribution. But we are not complacent, and as long as there are any young people who wake up in the morning without a job, without a place in training, apprenticeship or education, we will continue to do our utmost to put that right. And John Swinney's budget today has made sure that we will be able to do that as best we can under the devolved settlement.
That concludes the debate on enterprise networks. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 7649 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revision to the business programme for Thursday, the 12th of September 2013. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7649.
Formally moved.
No member has asked to speak against the motion, therefore I now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 7649 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of business motion 7647 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a business programme. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. And I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7647.
Formally moved.
No member is asked to speak against the motion, therefore I now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 7647 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next item of business is consideration of two Parliamentary Bureau motions. I would ask Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 7633 on committee membership and motion number 7650 on approval of an SSI.
Formally moved.
The question on these motions will be put at decision time. The first question at decision time is amendment number 7643.1 in the name of Jenny Mara, which seeks to amend motion number 7643 in the name of Fergus Ewing on enterprise networks be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 7643.1 in the name of Jenny Mara is as follows: yes 35, no 84. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. The next question is amendment number 7643.2 in the name of Murdo Fraser, which seeks to amend motion number 7643 in the name of Fergus Ewing on Enterprise Networks, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on amendment number 7643.2 in the name of Murdo Fraser is as follows. Yes, 50. No, 70. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed to. The next question is that motion number 7643 in the name of Fergus Ewing on Enterprise Networks be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. We move to a vote. Members should cast their votes now. The result of the vote on motion number 7643 in the name of Fergus Ewing is as follows. Yes, 117. No, 3. There were no abstentions. The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 7633 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on committee membership be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. The next question is that motion number 7650 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on approval of an SSI be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The motion is therefore agreed to. That concludes decision time. We now move to members' business. Members who leave the chamber should do so quickly and quietly.